All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Rockmore, Associate Dean for the Sciences at Dartmouth College and also Director of the Newcomb Institute for Computational Science, who along with Dartmouth's Information Technology and Consulting Group and the Department of Film and Media Studies, as well as the University of Pennsylvania's Departments of Cinema and Media Studies and Online Learning Initiative, is very happy to welcome you to today's meeting, Beyond Zoom, Promise and Reality of an XR Program. I was talking to John Bell, one of the organizers, a little earlier today, and was reminded that at least some of the inspiration for these meetings started in a December 2019 internal symposium that we had about we were investigating the possibilities in pedagogy, scholarship, creative work, and so on in the AR VR space, hardly knowing that there was a pandemic that was about to assault the globe and change the way in which we interact with each other and technology. So given that, it strikes our Beyond Zoom title is both ironic, since here we are on Zoom having this meeting, but I like to think it's also aspirational, because we know that we're gonna get beyond meeting in a Zoom space. But that said, that we aren't gonna leave the lessons learned from technology and pedagogy behind us, but that hopefully we're gonna make good use of them moving forward. And that's a lot about that's why we're here today. There are actually some lessons learned. There are important ways in which I think the XR space is going to change what we do, amplify some of what we do. And it's exciting to see the continuing interest in this space. And I can say a little bit more locally, delighted that we now have this at Dartmouth, we now have this nice collaboration with Penn and with many of you who are on the call, and looking forward to continuing that and actually meeting you in person once we are beyond Zoom. So before I hand off, I just want to thank a bunch of people for putting this meeting together. John Bell, as I said, of our ITC group, along with Barbara Knopf and Professor Mark Williams in Film and Media Studies, as well as Peter DeCherney at Penn and Rebecca Stein at Penn. I also want to give a shout out to our Newcomb ITC XR fellow, Kayla Goyal, and Elena Arnold, class of 22. And thanks to Catherine Dara of Dartmouth Conferences and Events, and Jim Goodrich at Dartmouth ITC for helping us manage this. So thanks to everybody. So now my pleasure to introduce and hand off to one of the organizers, Peter DeCherney, Professor of Cinema Studies and English, and affiliate of the Annenberg School for Communication at U of P. So Peter, thank you. Take it away.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks to all of my co-organizers, and thanks to all of you for joining us. This is, is the second Beyond Zoom conference, following on one we hosted in August. I actually predict we're going to finish the trilogy and then go on in future years to have some prequels. So in a survey of last year's participants, we asked them to recommend keynote speakers, and today's speaker was a clear favorite. It's really a pleasure to introduce Samantha Gorman. Samantha is a writer, artist, curator, and educator. Her work combines text, cinema, games, virtual reality, and scholarship about digital media, often all at the same time and in the same project. With Danny Cannizzaro, she founded the game studio Tender Claws. Please check out the link later if you haven't yet. Her work has won so many awards, including being selected by Apple as one of the top 25 best apps of the year, a Google Play Award for Best VR Experience, and the Raindance Awards for Best VR Game and Mobile Experience. Her projects include virtual reality and Tendar. The later is, as she describes it, an AR pet fish powered by mobile vision and machine learning that feeds on our emotion and the world around us. Most recently, Samantha's released The Under Presents, made in partnership with Oculus Studios. And like so many of her projects, it combines VR with live action theater. Samantha holds an MFA from Brown University in writing for digital media and has taught at Brown and RISD. She recently received her PhD in Media Arts and Practice at USC School of Cinematic Arts, where she specialized in practice-based research on hybrid multimodal storytelling and immersive media. Samantha, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for having me. And I'm also teaching on Zoom. So, quite familiar with the limits and the affordances and constraints. So that said, I am going to screen share and take 1 second to set up my slides, as we all must do on Zoom. And I think the host is disabled screen share, but I can.
My apologies, I've enabled it now.
No worries. Okay, can everybody see this?
Yep, it looks good, filling the screen.
Awesome. So I looked through this conference, and actually I find the premise and the questions behind it that were listed on the website really fascinating. And I'm going to do something a little bit different, because usually when I give these talks, it's either in the capacity of an artist or a studio lead. But I'm also a professor at Northeastern in games and theater. So I'm interested in sort of, an academic bent as well. So I think I'm going to do something rare and kind of take you guys behind a little bit of the research and both the practical and the conceptual questions that led to these projects. I'm going to just focus on two, one in VR and one in AR. And they're going to be the Underpresents and Tendar. And I want to kind of illustrate how practice-based methods to extrapolate on findings in these experiences might be useful in thinking about both a research perspective and teaching. So to kind of give a little bit of context where this intersection lies, I wear kind of multiple conflicting hats. I'm both the co-business and creative lead of a studio of over 20 in LA that makes entertainment projects in media. But I'm also an academic. I'm interested in media studies, criticism, and rigorous inquiry into industry structures and these cultural objects. So I consider myself a humanist. I'm very interested in how technology augments or reveals what is intrinsic to the human, whether that is modes of language, expressivity, or connection. Thank you, Peter, for the introduction. So I won't really tell you too much about my background, but I do come from more of an avant-garde conceptual practice of language arts and performance, and then taught myself to code and eventually got into media studies and game engines. And now I work solidly in the area of games. In my academic life, however, in part of my PhD, I actually study immersive spaces from, cave paintings to Roman villas to panoramas to today, and think about how they influence the church and state use them to influence hearts and minds and storytelling over time. But in my creative life, as Peter said, I am the head of Tender Claws. We're a 15-year-long art collaboration between myself and Danny. We incorporated about 5 years ago. We're now on our 7th commercial partnered project. We're often known for story-driven experiences that push different technologies while walking a line between commercial viability, technical innovation, and entertainment. My dream for Tender Claws is the ability to use popular mediums and emerging technologies to foster critical debate and discussion that enable players to become more engaged and informed about the media they are consuming. So game design is how I make my critical argument and research intervention into the industry. So how this kind of started is I lived through this. I worked, in a cave in a virtual reality lab for from 2002 to 2010. I took a break to do some other projects, and then all of a sudden I came back to this. And I think there was kind of a really weird, surreal, like pivot point for me in my existence. And I found that, as I'll speak to when doing research, the pace of industry is oftentimes antithetical to longer reflection. And I've kind of brushed up against that over and over again. So I'm very interested in helping students become historically informed and ethical makers. And because this is something that is going to come back to show you, it just so happens that the two projects I'm highlighting have theater roots, but this is something from 2010. And after working, so the cave, this is what a cave looks like. This is where I worked for that many years. And it's an interesting place because it's different than a normal HMD, which is the head mounted display. And the graphics behind it are usually stereo projected. And it's often rendered to the perspective of the person who's inside wearing a polyhemous tracker. And usually when you see projects like this, it's people who are interested in spatial hypertext or recreating science visualization, which I worked in, or creating like Mario Kart, Nintendo 64 graphics. And by the end of my time there, I actually realized that what's most interesting is the experience of perceiving the world and the vision next to other people in relation to them, and also the switch in perspective. And that made me realize and understand VR and this space as a more performative medium and as a sort of staging in itself. So this is, I went very minimal on this final piece. And here I partnered with dancer Estamina Shrimos from Chicago. And she's really responding to the beats and section that we choreographed. Some of the language was coded to slip out of her glimpse, and it was only legible by the participants. But it's also kind of, it's also dynamic, and she's taking cues from the light. It's interesting because, it's telling how these technologies really evolve into obsolescence. And this final piece is accessible only in documentation, which, ended up being its, final form. So I think that's something really relevant to think about when you're doing research in XR versus the promise and the reality, right? So the next project I'm going to talk about, it's about a 1.5-year project. There's so many things to discuss on it, but I'm going to only focus on a few aspects. And some of the design challenges, we were coming off of virtual reality, where we were in partnership with Google before ARCore was announced to make this project. So we were literally building the staging as it was happening. And for indies, we actually were the people to bridge the conversation in this larger company between mobile vision, machine learning, and AR. So this is one of the first projects that combined those elements. There's lots to discuss in this area, and there's some things that I'm going to have to kind of talk around, but I want to talk a little bit more how I formulated the project and the research questions. So to get to the thing that I want to show first is the end product, and I'll take you on the weird journey to get there. So it's always interesting to see that trailer. It's our dev, the producer, and me who are, shooting, directing, editing as indies do. But when I was thinking about this project, because I'm often using theater as a framework, is something that is part of my background and helpful for me to think how AR and VR might, operate in analogous ways. The early AR projects were very surface and tabletop based. And I think a lot of them still are, where you're really tracking a surface and an area. And I was interested more in thinking about the contextual storytelling of a player's full world. And that kind of subtle difference in how you design for that space, I think, is important. I'm very interested in kind of, intimacy and, what is, this idea of the authentic or genuine and how that can be measured and if that can be measured. One of the things that I study is, one-on-one theater, theater for small audiences, and kind of, this idea of like intimacy and very, individualized encounters. So I was thinking about the model, and actually this is, I think, looks a little general, but it's super helpful when you think about more of the trend from, the postmodern to, the digital space, and how open theater and the happenings of Alan Capro are really, I think, useful how technology works. And I see a lot of like analogous relations between VR in terms of a change from like a more of a plotted experience to the naturalness of needing rhythms of attention or patterns or variable interactions. It's constantly redrawing the frame around you. There's constantly splices and shifts and how the apparatus actually works and appears. When I was doing this, I was very interested in this idea of social relations and how things are moderated and mediated. In particular, there's this kind of hype and this hope of AR that one day you'll just walk in the world and you'll get all this information around you in layers of like, you'll be able to read menus and call up other data or, be directed. And then I was thinking about, okay, well, what if in your relational aesthetics, you're to another person, you can look at them and then the AR will tell you information about them or how they're really feeling, like how surreal or ethically like difficult or, problematic but interesting would that be, and how can like the machine really understand and bend human emotion? So it's sort of this promise of how AR might mediate our relationships to each other. And I was really thinking about that, and in terms of world formation and attitude and what governs social behavior. And this idea of kind of dialogue, conversing and talking, not only in a literal way, but in terms of through a filter. And in terms of, how your idea of world formation and symbolic interaction with the world is shaped through the filter of AR as well. Our social understanding and our perspective of objects in our world. And we worked a lot with, machine learning and object tracking, not only like the physical objects and how that like brings our perception of the world, but also this perception of social objects and engagement with each other. So one of the techniques I'm trained in theater is called the Meisner technique. And that is actually a really strange process of repetition and understanding of each other that's meant to dive deeper and build these layers of intimacy to get at what a genuine encounter is between another person through dialogue and world formation. So for instance, one person might start out saying, I feel vulnerable, and the other person would, do you feel vulnerable? I feel vulnerable. Do you feel vulnerable? And then it could switch subtly over time to try to get at a more, this idea of authenticity. So I decided that I wanted to try to apply this to what it meant for sentiment analysis, in particular, this idea of, AR layers on the world. And this again is something that I did as an early prototype as a hackathon with my producer, Tanya, at Microsoft. The gestures are always super performative too, physically.
You're tired.
I am tired.
You're tired.
I am tired. Are you tired?
No, I feel disappointed.
You look disappointed.
I am disappointed.
This is going well.
You're watching me. You're watching me.
I am watching you.
I'm
They
being
want to
watched.
look away. Sorry, I am being watched.
seem frustrated.
They will never believe you.
I am frustrated. I feel absurd.
You are absurd.
I feel
Stop
absurd.
being rude.
I feel vulnerable.
They are thinking about lunch.
You are vulnerable.
I am vulnerable.
You seem worried.
I am worried.
They know.
You are worried.
Speak softer.
I am worried.
You are.
I am worried.
They are getting uncomfortable.
Okay. So that was, a thought experiment on how, the machine might kind of moderate and mediate our relationship to another. So as we were developing this, we knew AR core was coming down the line, and we were vaguely aware that there was, these sort of startups or other libraries, coming up the pipeline for machine learning and sentiment analysis. So the bridge from version 1 to 2 actually became more apparent when I started to look into these other companies and realized that there was a lot of rhetoric that often felt like a parody or a novel waiting to happen in terms of the hyperbole around these technologies and the hope and hype of the future and how accurate they might be, not to mention the ethics. And I became fascinated by the idea of human expression as binnable and finite. A lot of how machine learning works is I'll talk around it, but basically like what it can best recognize are, anger, surprise, fear, smiling. And it's a very like definitive, like explicit definition of those things with the performing a specific gesture at this moment, right? And that's, the reality at this moment in the technology. So I looked at some of these free products from smaller teams to let us do the sentiment analysis, and became interested by what, if any, data was being gained from its users. What was the true value of joining beta testing? And that inspired the narrative, the speculative fiction of Tendar. So at its core, Tendar's story of a company and its product to collect data manifested as a AI virtual pet Tamagotchi that evolves with your literal emotional labor and feasts on the tears of your loved ones. It's our most straightforward and exact parody to date. It's meant to not only bring attention to companies like Tendar, but the guppy himself is both technically and fictionally an actual artificial neural network that uses machine learning. In the fiction of Tendar, when you're feeding it your actual emotions, you're showing it your emotions, you're conceptually contributing to the company's data set to train Tendar's proprietary algorithm, the fish. Engaging with Guppy and feeding it emotions over 3 weeks, it gains language, and it eventually has a crisis over its identity before rebelling against the company and bringing what is happening to the surface. The story and practice, the users learn more about neural networks and how machine learning works, as well as Tendar's goal as a company. So the app actually manifested in about 5 different screens. There was like a way to, view the world and kind of get the fish had almost a David Foster Wallace length novel of different texts that were generated and written that could come up in response to, these 200, objects it could recognize, the different types of emotions it could bin. The kind of shift in, world formation and dialogue, because, there's difference between, I think, the research questions and the practicalities when you're releasing something to an audience of how it can be used, was often like it, even though we have a social mode to use with another person, it was often an individual experience. So therefore the dialectic kind of had to change between you, and the game of the Meisner technique was this sort of like expressions of the fish and kind of mirroring almost, the neurons of this artificial character with your expressions. And then, if you came to an understanding through this, kind of gameplay, it would then give you a fortune or a result, or if it's interpretation of what you were really feeling, and then grind your expressions down into food. And that food would then be fed to the fish, giving it different moods and information that would change the narrative over time. So the fish had so many things it could do based on how you interacted with it and what mood it was in at the time, as it's, told this particular narrative. The really interesting thing for us that was, the challenge is we were kind of the first people as this was being integrated to figure out how to do machine learning and scanning of objects in the real world. And, we can get more into the question if there's specific about that, but I am going to kind of move. It's a very nuanced topic. I'm going to move over it quickly, but we ended up using a neural network developed at Stanford that was super good at recognizing specific dog breeds. And I think that's the promise or reality of this type of stuff, where you may have data sets or things you're pulling in, but you inevitably have to figure out there's still human intervention in how you're massaging the data and teaching it not to understand dog breeds or weight that as much, but maybe weight things that, it does, you want to know if you have a fan in your house, not a schnauzer. So I think that's, an interesting aspect to it. So the lessons that I've learned, and it's not just from Tendar in this case, but also from often being on committees to review both academic and, industry research and, validate proposals in these types of areas. I think there's two elements. There's first the element of like what I personally learned through and am constantly learning through doing research and creative practice. And one is, the reality versus the expectation, right? So it's really important to understand the apparatus, the limitations and the constraints of what you're working with, rather than maybe, making necessarily a hypothesis. Like you might have an idea of how, like, a more authentic interaction or, questioning the authenticity of interaction can happen. But, for something like the HoloLens, when you actually, if you wrote that as an academic proposal, it would be different than the actual process of developing it. When you realize when you're putting it on your face, it's obscuring 50% of your facial data, right? Like the actual apparatus and the technology constrains and changes how you have to design for a thing. So like having, like hands-on R&D experience, I think is super important before you actually submit proposals. And I've seen a lot of work as well, sometimes submitted that is maybe like in a particular area of, knowledge, but it's not necessarily a full review of the literature in industry. And industry, it changes so fast, like so fast. That like you might start a proposal, on 1 month and then 3 months later realize there's, something that you haven't heard about that's been really, released in kind of a wider world. So like being both academic and in the industry, it's constantly shuffling and balancing between those two poles that I think creates some like really fascinating nuance. And yeah, I think the importance of consultation and getting lots of data points from those who work in the tech itself is super important. So in terms of sentiment analysis itself, unlike art, this is some of our concept art for, how, human emotion might be expressed in, different, more like graphic and nuanced ways. And the reality is not as colorful. It does not match the practical, dystopian or utopian use cases one would think of that are suggested by the technology. Human experience is understood as binable and finite, as I said. It's more interesting for it being incorrect and where it's incorrect than where it's correct at this moment. There's readable gestures that are always performative in itself and culturally specific. So we have a different piece related to this one that's an installation where two people are actually guided by the fish and how to make expressions, and the fish judges them on their expression. But there's also asymmetric audio where they think they're being given the same instructions, but they could be given different instructions. So it's also about like the relations of how they're judging each other and how the apparatus is judging them. But what we found over and over from showing it on show floors is the obvious thing where not everybody's facial, dimensions or expressions are the same. But the way that these things are measured sometimes are, can be precise. So when you show anger, you have to like really furrow your brows and tilt your head downward, right? There's a certain performative element that's specific in these gestures. Yeah, so in terms of things that I've seen that's often used in relation to maybe could be related to education, but I've seen in this context in marketers and advertisers is this idea that they can deploy the software to really understand their audience's receptivity and desires. Despite the extremely interesting ethics of this and, how and when it's deployed, in practicality, I'm not sure it's as efficient or practical data. So, it's like, what is the deal with the devil here? There's a large lift and effort for what I'm not sure would actually yield anything beyond a thought experiment. And I think, was thinking about what this might be used in, if you were on Zoom, you could have, this is obviously like ethically complex, but a filter that would be like, oh, is my student reading email? Is my student looking away? How much attention are they paying? And I don't think something like that in terms of video conferencing is necessarily like anywhere near here, nor, yet, nor maybe should it be. Yeah, I think it's more interesting as a thought experiment at this moment in the reality, but I think, yields interesting potentials for what the future could bring. The other is like the data, something that without having been embedded in this system and done this work, I wouldn't be as aware of, is the talking point of data privacy versus reality. And in reality, what I found is the monster that you see that, like the easy targets are not necessarily the more concerning targets. They're not saying everything is perfect all the time, but if there is a public perception of anything, the way that, industry works, there's a lot of high sensitivity and resources that I've seen go into larger companies. Where the data, becomes more concerning is there's often small startups, and because of the pressure of iteration, they often do, not the one I showed, but others that I'm not going to, bring into it, because they have to iterate so fast. There's a lot of pressure, there's not a carefulness to data. And the reason they're iterating so fast is to be acquired by these larger companies. And it's really actually that pipeline that I think is where we should, as academics, should be like putting more attention to, and is, probably a little bit more interesting and concerning. So we had this really interesting experience when we started this, and it was also very important to us, and this is also another question about research, is we don't, as artists, and this is, I'm constantly caught between these poles, because, in an academic context, there's this thing with like, where's the data, where's the analytics, where's the research? But as artists, we do not collect those things. And that is part of also our craft and our statement. So when we started this project, it was made, where we didn't know quite how it was going to be deployed, but eventually we were able to push for it. And one of the first that there's no data being shared. This is all local to your phone. These are actual, machine learning algorithms that run locally on your phone. There's nothing exchanged in the cloud unless you, post a picture of yourself. So as an art project and thought experiment, and the way we, presented this as Sundance in an installation where we had our actors and our devs as friends, we literally made company jumpsuits, and we were all pretending to be representatives of the company and talking about this absurd technology and how it worked and forms this installation. It was a more interesting art project because it got people to engage with the technology, and our responses at Sundance were like, oh, you should really platform this and then sell it to VCs, imagine the type of, use cases you can have in, education or in marketing. Or the other spectrum would be like horror, and as artists, there's the conversation happening about the work. But in reality, especially as, the public became more aware of these data sharing things, we're like, okay, is it more important for us to have these conversations or to make people feel comfortable to engage with the speculative fiction enough? And that is why we break the fourth wall several times. This is one of the splash screens and the openings of the project, which helps to reinforce that your data is not actually being shared during this experience. The other thing that maybe we can talk slightly about in Q&A is there's a crazy and interesting nuanced difference of timelines. That I'm still kind of as I'm, more and more, in academia and becoming a professor, I'm dealing with this shift of industry versus academic timelines for research, and those being two completely different things. And, I mean, there's the obvious thing you would think about in terms of, the lift for these projects, the timelines, the funding needed. But then I think there's other more important subtle nuances that I'm still trying to kind of bring to the surface and think about, in my experience. And there's definitely pros and cons. It's really fascinating. I would say that, there's working in a studio and in like a context is that you can have rapid, intense development timeline. And that allows you to shift and pivot really fast because, XR, and that's, I think, the reality of it is it's super unstable and evolving, especially. And like the way that even like something as small, like you might not think about in terms of like you're working on a project with your students, if you're, you can get good Unity devs and then Unity will change something and you'll have to update the whole library of the project. It's a constant cycle and it's a constant practice. So, in industry, there is elements to like, you can like dial up your Unity contact and, there are some for education, but it's not quite the same. So there's like a really interesting, I think, balance, in different hurdles that, academic research or making these, if I was making these in a lab or university context would be different than making them in a studio context. But I think both are equally valid. I'm also able to have a kind of a clear view of what might be coming down the pipeline in the next 3 or so years, which can also help me think about and shape research. One of the benefits of a slow timeline, like this project in particular, I wish I could sit with it longer. I wish I could, really formulate more of these thoughts around, theater and how I'm using this sort of, expression, for this book. The realities is I was directing this at the same time I was directing The Under, but I'm often directing 2 projects at once, that I can't announce, and I don't have the time to all the time, really sit and collect the data and collect the research and, think about the luxury of like sitting with something. And I think culturally it's important to sit with something, especially new media, for time, because often in reflection, I think, what is brought to the surface, it, can be really valuable. Yes. It's also, I think, in best practices are really hard to define in XR because, it's assuming XR is one concrete thing or genre when it's so many different approaches that are constantly evolving and shaping every day. So the last project I'm going to talk about, and this one is a little bit more brief, but is my most recently released project. Departed from theater after Tendar, and then I was returning to, VR as a theatrical space, which ties back into the cave. To create this project, I worked with the team, immersive theater troupe called Piehole in New York, which are amazing. And they've been doing this type of work for years. And, we kind of iterated on the early actor interfaces together. I use, the theater methodology I'm pulling from is like Grotowski prop work. I'm pulling from Anne Bogart's viewpoints for like improv and, derived theater. There's a different way. I'm very interested in, and this is where I think it aligns with teaching, in how to invoke invitation, address, and response in a virtual embodied environment together. So in The Under was actually like 6 hours of gameplay. There's also a multiplayer hub with a lot of custom tools and spells. And then there's live actors. The live actors I worked with for, training and talking through all the different creation of this world together for about a month before we launched live. When we launched live, they were performing about 8 to 10 hours a day, not one actor, but multiple, almost every day for a year. And this was before COVID. So there, maybe in Q&A we can get to it, but that was a really powerful and strange experience to live through, with a virtual community. So further ado, there's a sort of story that's kind of encapsulating all of The Under. And It's a type of vaudeville stage. It exists outside time and space. There's a lot of looseness that, led to, different storylines and improvs, but it created a elastic and stretchable world to encompass, all that we were doing with it from a theater perspective. It's inhabited by these lost voyages and souls that wandered off course and became lost in time. They all gather at the end to perform for you in your guide as the mysterious MC. So for those of you not familiar with the project, I'm going to show a brief, you can see that trailer on mine. So I think I'm going to show this one, which kind of dives more into the live characters.
You have the choice of who you want to be and what powers you want to give yourself.
If we want to transport ourselves or players, if we want to spawn items, if we want to enlarge them, if we want to shrink them. With all of these tools that we choose, we enhance the story.
Okay, come close. Just bow your head a little bit. I pull out this sword.
I have a cat, and he's the king of the kitty cats, and his name is King Kit, and he goes in and he makes the nights of the wet food.
You are no longer kittens. You are all lion.
One of the characters I play is a tour guide that goes around, brings players to different locations in the Under, and then does some different plays or skits with them. It's a participatory tour.
I play Wild. He drinks a little too much and he likes to dance. He's very much a gateway to give people permission to play.
I have a character called Tumbleweed McGillicuddy.
It's a little game I like to call
Don't Push the Button might be my favorite game in the Under. It is just a button on the stage that you don't push.
Not too close to the button. 3, 2, you're almost there. Oh, don't push the button. 1.
And someone's already pushed the button. 80% of the people push the button, which teleports them across the map to a different side of the world, and they have to find their way back. And then I throw them up in a cage, make them do a little dance. It's very fun to be able to affect the environment and the different props that they get to use.
For anyone who's trying to jump into the game for the first time, you're going to have a great experience. Something is going to happen.
So to create the underlying technology for this, it took us roughly 2 years. This is a behind the scenes view. Actors do have dressing rooms, virtual dressing rooms. They can change their avatar and choose props. They can see where other actors are in the game and jump into different rooms and kind of mess with them, as well as kind of have a bird's eye view of general how many people are in all these different simultaneously instances. Because it's not like our later project Tempest where it's a time ticketed show. It's a living space where they can actually inhabit and possess NPCs in the world at any time. So it's a very important distinction. The thing I do want to briefly end on is some of the kind of lessons about attention and collaborative work in VR I've learned through this project. To kind of illustrate that, I'm going to show you a few specific clips. So there's different types of performance. One is a live stage show that can pop up unexpectedly between pre-recorded acts. This is our Office Fitness jazzercise routine. And one of the ways of seeing and noticing is pay attention to how the office pariah role is given out to the audience member, and how that they're communicating with their body, and then that exchange is then rewarded.
Pariah. No one likes you because your lunch smells and you tell dumb jokes and you're always going over people's head, taking their duties away from them. So what we're going to do now is we're going to point at Phil, everybody. All ready? And point. And point. Point at Phil, the office pariah. Point. And point. And point. And point and Phil. You can point at yourself. Point at yourself. Yeah, really get small. Get little. Feel that shame. Think about what you've done. Oh, okay, that's enough. We've given Phil a hard time now. Now, because Phil was such a good sport, Phil, look, don't get too downtrodden. Because you're on stage. Phil, congratulations. Snaps for Phil. Snaps for Phil. Phil, snap for yourself. Self-care, Phil, self-care. All right, Phil, what you're going to do now that you're the star, you are going to do your very own move, your very own office move. What is it, Phil? What is it? What? Show it to the people. First thing that comes to mind. Uh-oh, we lost the music for you, Phil. Here you go. That's a very clear one. It's very clear what Phil's doing. I don't think anybody's uncertain what Phil's doing. Phil is moving the mouse. Moving the mouse. Oh, that's what he's doing. We're moving the mouse. Moving the mouse. Looking to a new page. Getting to a new page. Getting to a new. Maybe we're hiding. Maybe we're hiding the thing that we weren't supposed to be looking at work. That social media. Put that social media away. No more social. No more social. No more social. No more social. All right. Good, Phil. All right. This next one is gonna be for every single person. All right. Everybody feeling like getting involved?
All right, and the last clip I'm going to show is, there's roving live encounters. So in this context, talking about like building boundaries is James. And he's trying to explain a character in the world, which is a giant king crab that you can make sacrifices to. With the right combo of sacrifices, you get pulled into this crab's lair. And there's some exposition and story elements that he knows he has to drop, as well as being responsive to the users in the space. So one of the things he's doing is he's responding to and corralling a missing player. And he's using that to bring the player into the group and then creating a teachable moment from their response to kind of going off on their own. And where he's teaching is a sort of spell. So I'm going to fast forward. Right.
Bottle of wine? Is that it? Where's your object? Where's it? You got a teeny tiny object? Well, that's not fit for a king. You got to make it bigger. Someone help this person make it bigger. I cannot take you to the king with a teeny tiny salt shaker. Someone please show this person how to make it bigger. There we go. We start with 1 onion, egg. You know the saying, you give a man a fish he can eat for a day, and you teach.
So anyway, one of the things that, actors really do well, and I think this is related to, is like crowd work and how to bring in, these kind of rogue elements, incorporate them into the story and the moment, and then turn it into a teachable instance. So, one of the values that I should mention about, actors is they're trained professionals. These are professional theater actors who are especially immersive theater actors who have been doing this for a year. So when we talk about kind of the methodologies performance, we're talking about kind of few main things, and I'm going to, skip over them and maybe we can get into Q&A, but I am going to actually hopefully release a paper about this. And one in teaching I think relates is invitation and address to the virtual world. So you're welcoming them in, you're setting the boundaries and parameters, you're holding space. You're making the participant being seen. And I think the power of being seen in an embodied personal space, is really important. And some of the techniques that we're using to do that is cheating out, you're directing your body. There's some kind of research, I think it's being done at Stanford now, we'll see how it comes out, but about mirror neurons and, teaching in a virtual space and the importance of, empathy and connection in the body. So that's another way of showing like, yes, I am paying attention. I am, engaged in the scene. And there's, I won't go into the different specific strategies we use for grabbing attention, but, sometimes it's using props or totems or, objects. Sometimes it's using a request or like a prompt enough to create the possibility space for play. And these are all things that we might, have learned and understood from, teaching on Zoom or teaching on tech. It's really, monitoring the crowd, responding the best you can, and then, creating the possibility space for discussion. And the body, even though it is in a virtual space, the body, the gestures, the physicality, the presence is still very key. And, the second thing is really creating boundaries. So you're not only like modeling behavior, but you're and incorrect behavior. And we do have a banning system and community guidelines. You're showing what's okay and what's not okay, but you're, creating free play. And by boundaries are actually paradoxically the importance to create free play. It's like posing a question that's open-ended, but then like being able to like create the kind of the lecture that you're giving through, the parameters of the experience. We're using cues and markers. We're often, using, objects or moments or even locations to point and like bring shyer people in to direct the rhythms of attention of the experience and give space. So I'm going to end, and I think that this is a, co-presence future teaching. It's a super fascinating thing. I think yes and no. I think that conceptually, I think, actor dynamics can be a really big and fascinating way to entry, into this. I'm still thinking and writing about these topics. I think it's definitely space in the future. I do think that, really you want to question why though. Why are you using VR? And I think some forms of collaborative work, some forms of presence can be really powerful, as well as potentially the ability to create auditory or visual augmentation over the situation that you wouldn't in other mediums or other worlds. Practically in the reality, I think it is still a little bit in the future. I think, there will be platforms, coming down the line, I'm sure, for education, but I think that right now there's a lot of, thought experiment that has to happen. And I think that's sort of where we're at. All right. Well, thank you very much. I hope there were some takeaways or some, things you can pull from this work.
Yeah, thank you. That was really great. The question actually, if I can ask anyone, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box and we'll try to get to as many as we can. We have 5 or 6 minutes for questions. The question I wanted to ask is actually about the point you brought up at the end, which is why VR? If you talk about your interest in emotion, does that come from the theater? And you talk about the way you kind of evoke and engage emotion live in theater versus VR. And in particular, a lot of your work seems to be interested in exploring discomfort in viewers, and how that's sort of transformed through VR or AR.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for us, it's really like why VR is the question. Like it's like if you're making a film, that where you want to do close cuts or framing, you're using cinema, the language of cinema in very specific ways. For us, if we're using a platform, we're thinking about what it does well. And and in our case, it's really the proprioception of the body. And, the haptics, the experience of being embodied, the experience of gesture and language, like even though the audience doesn't speak for various reasons, you can still get so many communication details from it. And I think that is something that one of the things that, VR does really well. There's a whole bunch of, other things, but I'll try to, speak fast.
Yeah, so we have a few questions. One is everyone wants to know when they get to play with Tendar in the App Store.
It's out. It's been out for a few years. But on Android, so that's one of the things where I was actually going to talk about the difference research in academic versus industry context is and because it's moving so fast, if you're early in something, some of the stuff we did in Tendar and ARCore cannot be done in ARKit, and that is something that you only learn or happens to you as technology moves on. And that's where I'm talking about obsolescence as like important thing to factor into your research, because it's a real thing. So, yeah.
So do you pay attention to archiving your work? Most of these platforms won't exist in a decade. And yeah.
That is a huge question. There are some people who are really interested, like Dini Gregar and Victoria, does archiving of ELIT and they're in different ways. I am interested in that as an academic. Conceptually, most of the artists and practitioners see it as a feature of the medium, and they are not on my side. So it's different, I understand both points of view. It's that archive of the cave is the video, right? That's sometimes what it is. And that's a whole other interesting discussion.
Yeah, no, hopefully there's another group of archivists out there who are trying to protect every platform along the way so that nothing gets lost. So someone asks, Randall Rode asks, what technologies are you watching now? Which ones do you see as most promising to help you tell the stories you want to tell?
Yeah, the stories I want to tell are obviously really tied into the technology. I like, apropos of nothing, I'm very interested. We have a long form comedy game that's going to be announced very soon. I'm interested in the future of BCI, brain computer interfaces, possibly for the ethics or the conceptual, again, like the dialectics, the conversations, and what it means to communicate with machine and interpretation of machine versus human language is something that's interesting to me.
Yeah. Bill Gall asked a question that actually doesn't get asked enough, which is, can you talk about sound in your work and how that helps to create an immersive environment and control attention and interaction?
Oh yeah, no, that's a great question. That is, I think, the number one in importance. One of the number one's importance in VR that's overlooked, because people really focus on the visuals, but when directing the rhythms of attention, not only in actors and voice and calling, but cues and game design, there's like this idea of weenies and visual cues of directing attention and flow and play, but sonic cues are actually maybe sometimes an easier bridge and even more important in terms of directing spatial awareness and intention. Yeah, I think there's a bunch of other things, but
something I've noticed as making documentary style VR films is just that the audio recording technology has come so far, even very recently.
Yeah,
the kind of spatial audio, ambisonic sound is now just a norm.
Yeah, and there's all different, and that's one of the things, if you are doing a project, I think putting sound into your research project takes it from like 60% complete to all of a sudden feeling 80% complete sometimes. Yeah, there's a lot to say about even implementing spatial sound in game engine, which you sometimes need specialists for.
Yeah, so I think we have time for 2 more questions. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about how you balance the commercial versus academic side. You talked about the horror, where people worrying about privacy versus the people wanting you to commercialize what you do, trying to pay attention to academic research versus corporate research. But how do you end up balancing them in the end?
I think it's also, we're pretty straightforward about who we are, and people kind of, and part of it is people seek us out who know what they're getting, and know that our ethics and our background. So we're all, we try to be kind of clear about that, and the work that we're involved in, fortunately, is more about like speculative futures and thinking about working on things that are more like outward facing through games. And we haven't really gotten into games, but that's a whole nother conversation because it's a whole space that we work in, right? I think there are the only difficulties as a professor is things that you probably run into as well, with like being really clear about where your research is here and your work here, like the types of things I'm learning to navigate at a university level.
Yeah, I just, as a follow-up, and then maybe the last question is, where do you see more opportunities for academic research, academic grants, or in the commercial world?
It's strange because I don't think the camps really are terribly good at cross communication. So what that ends up with is, for opportunities, there are people who are interested at tech who are interested in maybe education consultation for XR, but they don't necessarily know where to find specialists. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there I think are people who like create grant or research proposals, but aren't really fully aware of the capabilities of the tech or what's out there. And I think there needs to be there's opportunities, I think, for both partnerships, for consultation to, like create, really get at that meaty research question faster, through what is possible and what is impossible. And then, I think the role of an academic and really, cultural and knowledge and, ethics and production is important as consultants on the other side. So I think there needs to be more cross, sure.
Yeah, no, ideally it would all come together and we see the value across the border. So this was really great. Thank you so much. I'm just going to remind everyone as a follow-up, you might be interested tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern time. We have a panel of grant experts talking about grants that are available and how to get them for XR. So please maybe but in the chat, you can I'll thank Samantha. This is really, really helpful. Great to see all of your work. Please Not now, but at the end of the day, go check out all the links and download the apps and look at all of her amazing projects. Thanks so much for joining us again. And I'm going to turn over now to John Bell for the
Thanks
next panel.
for having me.
Great. Yeah. Thank you very much, Samantha. That was very good. I don't know how we'll follow, but the way that we'll follow is by going with a lightning round. So the way that this is going to work is the presentations that you'll see next are going to be sort of 5 minutes, quick hits on a number of different projects. As you might expect, 5-minute time slots with many people on Zoom. Things are going to go fairly quickly, and we'll try to do our best to transition in between as we can. I will let people know when their 5 minutes is up and try to move on because we are packed in a little bit here.
Hey.
Whoops, Peter. Oh, okay, gotcha. So last note on Q&A. If you put your questions into the Q&A box, then we will ask at the end of the session. So we'll go through all of the talks first and then have one group Q&A at the end. So if everybody is all on board for that, let's start out with Alyssa Indelicato and Cindy Tysick. Alyssa is from the SUNY Upstate Medical University, and Cindy is from the University at Buffalo.
Hi, thank you so much. Just going to share my screen. Great. So, hi everyone. My name is Alyssa Indelicato, and today I will be presenting a project that was worked on by myself and a team from SUNY Upstate Medical University. Our project focuses on virtually training health professionals how to communicate with Alzheimer's patients and their caregivers. We have a contractual relationship with Virtual Ability and no other disclosures. So Alzheimer's disease is a serious problem in the US, and we currently have a limited number of health professionals to care for this growing community. So we developed a quick virtual learning module that allows students to gain the skills they need to communicate with Alzheimer's patients and their caregivers. Specifically for the training, we wanted to create a virtual curriculum, make it applicable to a variety of healthcare professionals, and evaluate it for knowledge and self-efficacy. So students first enter the virtual world of Second Life, and they're guided through the world with prompts on the floors and walls. They first go and meet the patient in a virtual clinical exam room, and they ask them a series of questions through a chat feature in Second Life by copying and pasting the questions. After the encounter, the student gets the idea that he's living a generally healthy lifestyle. They then leave the exam room and enter a virtual office space where they meet his daughter and caretaker, Christy. And after her responses, they realize that Christy's quite concerned with her father's well-being. Students then are able to enter the patient's virtual home to better understand his lived experience and then triangulate all of their experiences. So we recruited a total of 60 students and from the medical professions, and this was a convenient sample. Most of our students were from the MD program, most identified as white and female, and most were between the ages of 18 and 34. Most students had heard of Alzheimer's in a classroom setting, but very few had actually performed patient care duties with someone with Alzheimer's. We found that knowledge and attitude increased. We found that general self-efficacy increased by 4.7%, and we had a system usability score that was close to above average. Students reflected on 3 nutritional and 5 safety concerns, and from their responses, we identified 5 major nutritional themes and 4 major safety themes. Students were overall satisfied with their experience. And so we found the Alzheimer's virtual training increases knowledge and self-efficacy. Students report satisfaction in the learning environment, and the tool can be easily disseminated. Thank you.
Alrighty, so what I wanted to talk about was the experiential learning project that I have at the University of Buffalo. It's related to using virtual reality for dementia patients. What I found was there was a project out of the UK that had done research using virtual reality and people who had dementia, and they found that in the virtual experience, they seemed to not have as many incidences, and they were able to kind of be talked through an episode. The reason I was interested in this is because at the time my grandmother, who was no longer with us, suffered from dementia, and so I know, what those moments look like. And as a librarian, I was very interested in trying to maybe create some content that people in the health profession, social workers might be able to use for people with dementia. So what I ended up doing was creating this project, and any undergraduate student could come and speak to me about the project. And what they were given was a reading list. With the reading list, they were also given a walk through dementia, which is an app that you can download onto your phone, and you can see what the experience is like. And then what we ended up doing was having students pick either a neighborhood in Buffalo, or we also had some students who were in New York City and film the neighborhood. And then we also had students who would recreate a moment in time, so a historical moment. So we had a group of students who had written the script and were going to film in 360 using a nano. They were going to film the moon landing. Unfortunately, that was March 2020, and that particular film did not happen, but they are still very keen when they come back in the fall. They want to go back and film that. So anyway, so it's a moment in time or a neighborhood. What we also now have is the Western New York Library Research Council is getting into immersive experiences. They have some grant funding for us, and they also have a database, a repository. So while we kept our film in box, that's where we stored it, they now have a way that we can now put our film into their repository and tag them with subjects so that it's findable. And so that is our project.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Cindy. So we will move right along here. And next up is Paula McDowell from the University of Saskatchewan talking about artful innovation in XR.
Okay, thanks, Cindy and Alyssa. That was a great talk. I'm assuming you can all see me and hear me and see my slides. I got a nod, that's wonderful. I am a professor at the University of Saskatchewan. I work in the area of educational technology and design. In my work, I work very closely with teachers to integrate media and technology in their classrooms to enhance learner engagement, ingenuity, and inclusion. And in my research, I am studying the design of immersive learning experiences for pro-social and environmental change. What I want to share with you today is, from my experience, some instructional design strategies and some inspiration if you are looking to integrate XR into your courses, and how you might find your own path and some good suggestions for getting started. And I hope you can see this slide. The white text is looking kind of light on my screen. Sorry about that, but it looked better before. So where you want to start is a problem of learning, very important. And for me, some of the problems of learning, which I have listed on here, Zoom fatigue. Zoom was not designed to be an online classroom. Lack of engagement. If you're teaching online, what does it actually even mean to be engaged online? So we're redefining engagement. Lack of collaboration, lack of content or relevance. If you're finding that your students are saying that, you know, all those comments on, I'll never use this in real life, or why does this matter, or this is kind of pointless. So there's a lack of context there. Things are too abstract. Too much passive learning, lack of effort in assignments. So we're receiving these assignments, and if you're just getting a strong sense that students could be doing much better, but they are unmotivated, they're not satisfied. If you're doing formative feedback and you're just not getting good results from your students, you know, you have a problem of learning, you have something you need to do to change. And also another problem of learning that I have online is fewer opportunities for connecting with students. These serendipitous kind of interactions are really important for me in my teaching. So again, problem of learning, that's really where you want to start. And if you're looking at integrating XR tools, they really should be selected with pedagogy, student experience, and learning outcomes as a priority. And on to the next slide. So for myself, this is a diagram, and it shows for me why I like using XR in higher education. And this is in undergraduate courses, and I also teach in a graduate program. And top, again, is what I just said on the last slide, is you really want to address a problem of learning. So I talked about some of the issues that I have in my courses. Jeremy Bailenson, he wrote a leading edge book called Experience on Demand. And he talks about problems of learning that VR, XR, really good to address. He uses this nice acronym called the DICE model, or the DICE sort of shortened form for what's dangerous, impossible, counterproductive, and something that's expensive or rare. Next on my list, I have interactivity, learning by doing and exploring. So for me, many of the strategies that I've used in a real classroom, I can use in different VR spaces, whether they're immersive in the browser or a standalone VR app. We can do a lot of things like pair and share, like just different cooperative group activities that worked really well in the classroom and they work really well in VR. So I feel I'm stating the obvious there, but it's really is an important one. And I think that there's just a lot of good opportunities for learning organically. Transversal skills and competencies. This used to be called 21st century skills, but it's expanded to include things like cultural relevance and cultural understanding and empathy for each other and respect for the environment. So things that are really hard to teach, they're easy to define, and there's some really good possibilities in XR for doing that. Co-presence. This is something I like to also call like this collaborative cognitive responsibility, where I'm not just the only one responsible for learning. There's a sense of a learning community and a collective. Next, world building.
Paula, I hate to jump in, but you're at time, so can you wrap up quickly?
Okay, so really quickly, this one is what my students call the best assignment ever. Leave it at that. Achieving specific learning objectives, instructor presence. Again, if you want your voice, there's a lot of opportunities here. Just really quickly, this, and I can make these available if anyone wants the slides. Community of inquiry is a model that's been around for 20 years, so it's got a healthy amount of critique. This is a model that was designed originally for online education, and it works really well if you want a model to start from with integrating XR. And it really focuses on teaching presence, cognitive presence, and social presence. and I prepared too much information. Just really quickly, some points to take away from. Set realistic expectations. If you don't have an instructional design team and you're one instructor, then start with something small. The journey to success happens with one small step. You want to schedule time for practice with your students. Try creative assessment. Okay.
Sorry to cut you off. But we can follow up in Q&A. So next up is Matt Lewis from the Ohio State University, talking about emerging applications for challenges for virtual campus spaces.
Thanks, John. Let me get screen sharing here. Can see that?
Yep, we've got it.
Cool, thanks. Hi, okay, 5 minutes. Matt Lewis from Ohio State University, and today I'll be briefly presenting recent progress and challenges for creating virtual spaces that are intended for online collaborative interdisciplinary research. The work I'll be presenting is emerging at the intersection of socially responsible design, computer graphics technologies, and data visualization, broadly designed. This past year has shifted my focus from centralized, expensive lab resources to decentralized, affordable, emerging technologies that we can use at home. Dan Rockmore said something last year here that I really enjoyed. He worried about XR becoming like visualization centers back in the 90s, big dusty rooms with a molecule spinning around in space that nobody was watching. So I've been slowly picking away at using XR to bring such campus spaces out to our academic community, despite people working at home. So here's a 360 photo of one of those dusty visualization labs that I shared last year. It was a great, simple starting place for this project. Instead of relying on expensive 3D scanners and services, I've started using 360 photos like the one on top as source images to create realistic textured 3D environments, and then working towards making this process available to our students. So in addition to now being able to share and walk around visualizations of mathematical abstractions being developed with engineering colleagues who also have XR capabilities at home, I've been able to start creating more complex virtual versions of campus research spaces to use for things like developing IoT device simulations or art installation spaces. But much more importantly, this semester, I've been transferring this knowledge to a grad student funded to work on a research project involving simulating an existing elementary education space that we no longer have ready physical access to under COVID. So here's our progress as of a few days ago from outside and interior views, and I expect to be walking around in it virtually within the week. So I'm very excited for that. This knowledge transfer has involved documenting my workflow in a series of examples for different steps of the process. My first attempts at tutorials are still, however, in my favorite 3D software, Houdini, which is not frequently used by most students. So my goal of translating this process to something more popular like Blender or Maya still remains future work. Some of our students have started to acquire lower power VR displays, and of course, most have access to smartphones. And such mobile hardware is finally now capable of enabling students to walk around inside web-based, low polygon textured environments using VR or AR, shared with just a URL and viewed with a web browser. In my design studio classes, students are finally beginning to explore XR resources that they can use at their homes. Recent examples include Aero and Reality Capture, Gravity Sketch, and Sketchfab. Recent interdisciplinary proposals with my academic colleagues have suggested using mobile XR strategies for community environmental health equity, digital humanities visualization, campus sustainability research, and locative data art. But several newer challenges are appearing for exploring new technologies in our work environment. Security, accessibility, and legal software evaluation processes are emerging as important considerations. These are all very critical issues, but some 3 to 6 month evaluations and rejections have been concerning. Perhaps unsurprisingly, many companies have not been willing to make modifications to their terms of service or interface accessibility or respond to security inquiries that are now required by our university. Compliance with these review processes intersects discussions about risk and precarity at a particularly challenging time. I'm showing here an LCD lighting panel I've connected to a new IoT board that I've just started working with at home. And many of us have been thinking about cinematic virtual production workflows. But the ideas I have in mind could all involve easily a half dozen bits of software just to get started. So I've been wrestling with how I can proceed for projects like this involving emerging technologies without running afoul of IT regulations. And I've been encouraged to ask how other institutions have been handling such things. So I'm asking. Regardless, this larger pattern of exploring new technologies, using them in collaborative interdisciplinary research projects, and then introducing them to students has consistently provided a useful framework. So I would love to hear from any of you that are engaging with any of these topics. Please feel free to email me with questions and ideas, and thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Matt. Next up, as we continue tearing through several presentations here, Maya Georgieva will be talking about the X Reality Center at the New School. Maya.
Hello, everyone. It's great to see so many familiar faces here on Zoom. I'm Maya Georgieva, and I am the Director of Education Futures and the XR and HTCI lab at the Parsons School, at the New School. And of course, some of you know, we have 5 colleges: the Parsons School of Design, Parsons Paris, Lang, College of Performing Arts, Public Engagements, and the New School of Social Research. So we are very interesting space where it's the #1 design school in the country, embedded in very serious social research and liberal arts. And so we wake up in February 2020, we were doing this, and a few days later, we were doing that. And yes, we were just these boxes pinned on the computer desktop screen. And so that gave us a pause, and particularly gave us a pause about what we do, but we didn't immediately come with the idea of leading a curriculum innovation initiative with XR. There were some precursors, and I think they were very important to us as we headed into that direction. First of all, we were working with so many students in their thesis, in their project, capstone projects, and we fashioned something, the X Reality Center meetups, for all of us to just talk and look at prototypes and work together. And then we also experimented, like everybody else, I'm sure, in Old Space VR, in Spatial, and then in Mozilla Hubs. And that was an interesting moment when we went in Mozilla Hubs and people are just laughing themselves out, really engaged. And there was definitely something that tipped me, something interesting can happen here. And in particularly, we are very interested in immersive storytelling and design, and looking into this, next frontier of making the, next generations of makers and creators. Our foundational course, immersive storytelling, happens to happen in fall 2020, where we had 100 students making the metaverse. And so they created these absolutely fantastic projects, worlds of cinematic, both cinematic and fantastic. We gave them a studio like this, and they tricked us. Oh, they left the studio and then they took us into the metaverse, and in a moment you'll see a magical forest of Hansel and Gretel Hubs edition. So this course gave us a really insight into what can happen with 100 students. It's also a foundational course, so students from all across our schools get a chance to actually participate in this every fall. It's part of our immersive story minor. That is, we have been around. The center has existed since 2017, and the minor is now 5 years old. So I will leave that for another moment. But then we said, okay, we had these conversations, people talking over the summer, people talking in fall. We've created at the time what we dubbed as an XR hub space for all of us together. It's the virtual, the virtual space for the New School. And we've done a number of different, we have tours, galleries, artist talks, and we moved on to actually putting the proposals for the Immersive Learning Curriculum Innovation Initiative. I personally was very we have been always working in the culture and less so in trying to actually frame it in very academic terms, but I guess it was the time for us to go there. And we didn't think about new courses as oftentimes these proposals call for. We wanted to actually enhance the existing courses, in particularly in a space we all find each other when our students are across the world. And so these are some of the domains we worked in virtual environments, social spaces, making in 3D worlds, and performance spaces, of course. And so our target success metrics for this was, of course, engagement. We wanted these students to be empowered, to try their creativity, and of course, something good comes from that. And yes, we were onboarding students on headset across the world. In China, we have a pilot with Quest and a pilot in China with Picos, and in Parsons Paris, and we were talking to all of these students and getting them online and trying these new headsets. And there's nothing else. The best part of my job has been unboxing headsets with students around the world and getting them into VR, just as we did in our spaces. We worked in these different domains, and this is a course with our partners in Wonder VR in 360 editing. We also have an amazing project with our students, and this is all student work in a gallery that we've created, that we collaborated with the faculty. And so you see a glimpse of these amazing spaces populated with student work. But what if you actually are in a science fiction course, and instead of just watching a video on a screen, you actually jump into the ship and meet your classmates there, and then actually get to explore the world around us. And so this is what we did in one of our other courses. And this is what happened when students can come in and basically join in with whether you in a space suit or as a panda. But nonetheless, they love being able to move and being able to talk, because this is precisely what cannot take place on Zoom. What else we're working on is we also exploring these as a social and public setting. And so for the International Women's Day, we had basically an exhibition with women from across the world, and they loved that we were able to put them right there on Fifth Avenue in New York City, just outside of the New School University Center in Parsons. And so this is just a glimpse of that event that took place in March. And keeping going, and that, as I mentioned,
Maya, you're almost at time.
Last slide. A pic is something that we're working right now. Kind of interesting that the sound became a conversation in the previous talk. So this is a Unity build where we are actually having our students build sound in virtual spaces since they are on campus. Fascinating project. So again, I want to say this is for me, virtual reality. The best way to look at it is that we shouldn't think about it as a media experience. We should fathom it as a human experience, as Jeremy Bailenson has said. And thank you so much, and excited to share these first glimpses of what's taking place at the new school this spring.
Awesome, thank you very much. Next up, if I can switch screens again. And I will just throw in one blatant plug that the Hubs work that Maya was talking about. We will get a chance tomorrow to go through Hubs around noon, if you are all able to stick around for that and want to take a look at the platform. But next up is going to be Yulian Radu from the Harvard University Graduate School of Education, talking about virtual makerspaces.
Hi, thanks. Let me know if you have trouble seeing my slides or hearing me. I'm assuming I'm all good.
Looks good.
Let me just move some things around here. So, hi, thanks for having me. So I'm a research scientist at the Harvard University Graduate School of Education, and today I'm going to just move some few things around here. I'm going to talk about the project that we are currently building, so it's a work in progress, but first a little bit of context of the kinds of things we do in our lab. So we are interested in makerspaces. These are basically spaces where people get together and build physical objects together. So these are students that just get together. There's no formal sort of instructor that is guiding the activity. People are doing this on their own. It's a really beautiful environment where people basically come in with ideas and they walk out with working prototypes or work inspirations and collaborations. One of the challenges here, though, is that People are usually interacting with physical objects that you can't see inside of them. So what we work with is augmented reality, usually in the form of HoloLens devices, where you can look at physical objects. In this case, this is a speaker. So when you're looking at it through a HoloLens, you can see extra things about how a speaker works. So the way a sound is made is using magnets and electricity, and there's audio waves coming out. So we're looking at how can we use augmented reality to enhance the way people look at objects. And we have lots of different projects. So some of them are about more physical, others are about electronics, so looking at existing circuits or looking at robots and things like that. And we study how people can learn about these things while they're physically in the same space, collaborating with each other and with the objects. But one of the issues with the current COVID situation is that this requires people to be physically present. So people are working with these physical objects. So what we've been building is a system that allows people to remotely connect to each other while one of them is in a physical makerspace building physical things. So I'm just going to show you this video. So the system basically allows multiple people to connect together. In this case, you can see there's a virtual space. This is just a mock-up of a physical person in yellow who is in a physical space using physical objects. There's also a person in green who's at home connecting through a PC interface. And then there's also a person using virtual reality from home in blue here. And so the system we've built, I'll just show you the use case here, where a person from home is watching through this window of this video that I'm showing, and they can see me. This is me at home. But the person who is at home can basically look around this space. This is a 3D scanned space. And from home, they can look around, change perspectives by using their mouse and keyboard. They can also guide me to do certain activities in the space. So they can tell me, pick up some objects, move them over here. This is spatial. So if they need to change their perspective, they can move around. And since it's a 3D scan, so this is collected using a Kinect, I can bring in a physical object such as my lamp. And the remote person can basically work with me in order to build things together. So they can tell me, take a ramp and connect that piece to this piece, and then let's see what it looks like in 3D. We can also bring in a real makerspace. So in this case, if I was in a real makerspace, you could have a 3D scan of the whole room. And you can do really cool things. So with augmented reality, I can be wearing a headset and I can work with virtual objects that are overlaid onto these physical space. So in this case, I'm just bringing in these Christmas scene virtual objects and I'm manipulating them with my hand. But the person who is at home can also say, oh, this lamp that you have here, which is a physical object, let's take it and let's modify it. Let's turn it into a monster if you can. So we can basically start to create these hybrid objects that are physical objects, but they also have these virtual augmentations on top of them. And we can communicate about how we would modify this object, either to create this virtual hybrid, or if we wanted to build it, we could 3D print these eyeballs and basically end up with a lamp. We can also do other things, such as take real objects. In this case, this is a real robot that I bring in here. It has sensors on it. And with this system, we can overlay things. So the system is taking real information from the reality and overlaying these virtual overlays. And now I'm interacting with a physical object while showing the student how it works on the inside. And you can do other things with circuits also using these overlays. And also the fact that we can have a virtual reality person who is at home using a VR headset, and we can all collaborate together. So in this case, there's 3 people. There's a person in a physical makerspace with physical objects. There's a VR person, and then there's a person who's watching them and collaborating them. And the cool thing is that we can do things that we would normally do in a VR environment, like take 3D objects and play animations. But imagining in the future where multiple students have access to this, we can basically allow students to be remotely connected from home also. So we can have multiple students who are in this virtual space. So I just wanted to show you this. The things, we haven't actually tested it with real students, but we have been talking to different people, and the kinds of things we find is that people want to use this for a variety of use cases, such as looking at 3D objects, collaborating around building and debugging and constructing physical objects. They also want students to be able to look around when you're performing an activity, or they want instructors to walk around a room to sort of spy on what different students are working on. So there's lots of different potentials. And in terms of next steps, we are thinking of teaching a makerspace class in which we have physical students and remote students connecting basically remotely through the system. And we want basically students to be able to access makerspaces across the world. So we're reducing the distance between somebody's interesting ideas and their ability to collaborate with someone in an actual makerspace who can build it. So we want to allow people across the world to connect to each other using the system. And we're planning to release it as an open source, likely at the end of next year. So we're still building this. And if you're interested in seeing this live, we have a demo at the ACM Chi conference that's coming up next month. So feel free to reach out to me using this email address. I'm happy to chat about this project. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I'm definitely going to be looking for that once it gets released. Final talk in this round of presentations is going to be Brian O'Keefe and Eileen O'Connor from Farmingdale State College is Brian, and Empire State is Eileen. Going to be discussing undergraduate and graduate students designing mixed reality experiences at SUNY.
Yes, hi there. Thanks. So a lot of this research, what we're doing is looking at designing mixed reality technologies within the socio-academic COVID-19 undergraduate experience. And to do this body of work, I've been collaborating a lot with our partners in the UK and Italy to pull together what we're trying to do here. And essentially what we're doing here is we're making sure that our students are becoming not consumers of mixed reality experiences, but inventors of emerging new mixed reality technologies and experiences. And we've seen a lot of examples of that here today, which is fantastic. And as many of you know, the notion of mixed reality is not new. It's been around for decades, since 1994. And we can the focus is usually virtual and augmented, but there's a lot of other opportunities that I want to point out. And these opportunities are augmented virtually. And of course, as you get into more tangible interactions through tangible media. And this is where I like to play in the spectrum. And of course, MIT and the Tangible Media Group has been doing this for a number of years, how to take digital information and make it tangible. A lot of the research that we look at is looking at metaphor theory from linguistics. I don't have time for this. But we also look at presence theory and the sense of illusion of non-mediation. Like, for example, having gorilla arms in VR is a common issue. But clearly, if you have gorilla arms, you're breaking the presence of being there in that virtual environment. And therefore, you're breaking, as we call it, the blend. And so what we've done is if you take presence theory, metaphor theory, throw it to undergraduates, they go cross-eyed, right? So what this tool does is get a novice, who never designed anything before, to properly consider the transitions between physical and digital spaces and back again, so that they designed not for a mobile app or an AR gadget, but they're designing for the physical place they intend their interactions to happen. And that's really the difference of what we bring to the table. And right now we're in a work in progress, design production mode. And of course, as I tell my students, before you do anything, you got to start with real data. You can't just pull fluffy stuff out of the sky and expect something good to come out of it. June, we had this intensive study for 2 weeks. We had to understand the impact of COVID when everyone went from an in-classroom experience to that online crazy world that we all experienced. And we got 2,100 responses on variations of surveys. And we used that surveys to design 8 novel mixed reality products. I'm going to show you 3. One is Clash. And what we did is we took our data, because we like to look at data, and we said, all right, what's happening here? Anxiety, disengagement with social, the black boxes, everyone knows about the black little screens that we all try to teach to. But how do we foster social engagement? Well, what we've done here is a little scenario that we designed is we have a little amiibo, which is a representation of you in the virtual classroom. And this amiibo is your representations, your presence within the classroom, not the little video that you see me talking to you right now. And of course, to get our students away from mobile devices, we turned it into a pop socket. So that's your little buzzer to try to get as best as we can to put these things away while we're lecturing, of course. Another idea was Google Meets after class. Again, we looked at data and obviously the disconnect of not knowing anybody while in class and feeling that disconnect of that social atmosphere. And so what we've done is we have Google Meets after class, which is a transitional piece of service that enables the students to watch together their favorite shows directly after class and then having a collaboration while they're watching at home. So they feel connected, but also apart distance-wise. Another is the plant connection. Again, we looked at that data once again, and they felt that the professors really didn't have that one-to-one feedback anymore due to COVID. And they want to have a better way to have interactions with the professors. So here we put the professor, Farmingdale is a big horticultural school, and we put the professor's presence in the plant pots here. So the professor can interact with a student through a display-based plant potting mechanism, so that you can see here that poor fellow is getting an F in his class because his plants are dying, and his professor is able to then intervene and say, hey, look what's going on. We can do about it, right? So in summary, we're always focusing on how do we transition between digital and physical spaces back again in a very clean and consistent way. It's too easy to bolt things on and think it's going to work. So thank you very much. Again, we're focused on students being consumers, not consumers of being mixed reality technology, but inventors. We have a paper coming out in DIS in a couple of weeks, DIS 2021, and please feel free to look out for it there. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Eileen, and I think my slides were submitted, so I'm hoping they're there. I do have another set of slides I can show.
Let me take a look.
In the meantime, I could start talking.
Yes, please do.
I've been working in virtual reality for quite some time, and I only have 2.5 minutes, so if I don't have slides, that'll be fine. I started out at RPI working with kids back in they're kids to me in the late 1990s, seeing how much everybody was already engaged in VR. And I don't think we called it that then, they were games. I wanted to make a deal with Nintendo to start working with these. Well, a little bit later, I started working for SUNY Empire State College, and they showed me Second Life. And I had never seen something like this. This was the game environment I wanted. For those of you who haven't experienced it, it's an immersive environment. You've got an avatar, you can walk around, but it got very expensive. VR, and I liked it. I was a science person, I'm from STEM. So I will play with technologies, and I used to be an IBMer. So I'm not good at this stuff, but I like it. So I got working in this, and then they decided not to continue funding it because it was expensive. Not most of the faculty were using it. I was using it. Stumbled into open source. Open source allows you to get these islands for free, so to speak. And since I don't have a lot of time, it's probably best I don't have the pictures, but I got tons of pictures of these. So you can see this in all sorts of links. And I have tutorials and I have MOOC courses on how to do this. But I was able to get my students in, and I worked through my courses. We do poster sessions, we have interactions, all the things you're talking about. And I've always taught 100% online. My college, we bring an adult. So I force them to download a viewer, but once they get in, they're quite happy. Now, what happened too with it going open source, for 20 bucks a month, they can develop their own islands. So I've had about 60 students, and we have a small graduate program, who created their own islands to great purpose. Anything from K-12 teachers up to corporate. I've got a couple of healthcare people looking at EMS right now. So we're low tech compared to this stuff that I'm seeing, which I am envying. And I hope to get in touch with you guys. But we've been able to do everything. I have an immersive VR residency, and you don't need a headset. But matter of fact, you can't use one with what I'm doing right now. They're talking about it, but headsets can be rather problematic. So we all get into this. We think we're there. They don't have to drive home. We're not worried about snow. It's accessible, it's inexpensive, and it's open source. So you can get this for free. I rent server space, but for 20 bucks a month, I can bring in 40 avatars 24/7, and my students love it. So I don't know how much more time I have. I think I got some wires crossed.
Yeah, you're pretty much there.
Okay. And I can
looked
put
around.
slides in the chat or something if people want to see them.
Yeah, that would be good. And we're also going to be sending out a follow-up to everybody who registered, so we can include additional links for materials in that as well, if anybody would like. So apologies, I don't see slides anywhere here, but thank you very much for talking anyways. It was really useful and helpful.
It's hard to shut me up.
People have said the same about me. I'll just say that and go. that's the last presentation in our lightning round. We can all take a little deep breath and calm down for just a second before we jump into Q&A a little bit. I do want to start out, there were a couple of questions that came in the chat that I'll get to in just a second, but through the Q&A here, there was a question for Julian from Karen Alexander. It says, I love this. So to clarify, this is a 3D scan that's rendered in real time. And I'm also wondering about some of the hardware requirements that you have when you're trying to capture that. So could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm using a Kinect, an Azure Kinect DK, which is the newer version of the Kinect. And it's just one right now. So it's kind of sort of right above me a little bit and facing my desk and myself. So I'm using that. A student could remotely connect into that and then look around my space in 3D. However, in order for me to interact with virtual objects, I'm also using a HoloLens device on my head that tracks my hands, and it also overlays these 3D visualizations on the objects themselves. And then somebody else can connect using the VR headset with whatever VR headset they have. We are thinking there's some limitations to the Kinect in that it can't see behind objects, and the resolution is kind of not so good. So we're thinking of using multiple Kinects to basically be able to look around the objects so that the resolution is better too. But yeah, that's the hardware. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does for me at the very least. But it's, to me, the interesting part is not just the capture, but how that's getting spread across multiple devices on the other end as well. Is that a common environment that they're all logging into? Do you have to sort of fracture for different viewers, or fracture the code, I mean, for different viewers?
It's tricky right now because I'm basically building the whole environment by myself. So right now I can only allow one computer-based user to connect, and they're connecting through remote desktop onto my computer. So I have kind of like, in the near future, I'll have like a thin client that the remote user can use. But it's really tricky for them to be able to connect and see what I'm doing. And then for the VR, so the PC user is kind of easy because I can just send one two-dimensional image of what the camera is seeing as they move around. But for the VR user, it's more difficult because I have to send the whole 3D scan mesh over to their computer into their VR headset. So still solving that problem. It's pretty slow right now for the VR user to be able to use this. But I'm looking into ways of compressing the data so that it can be transferred more quickly.
Thank you. Next question was for Maya, also a sort of nuts and boltsy question. Sage Freeman wanted to know if you're hosting your own Hubs cloud, and I'd expand on that a little bit. Have you played around with the different models of hosting hubs, and what have you found that's useful for you?
So we have been around, and we were in the moment when the pandemic hit. We were doing motion capture studio things. We were doing Magic Leap. We were doing Oculus Quest. We're doing these advanced headsets. Never thought that Mozilla Hubs would take off in such a big way with our students. So we did not initially, because it was just purely, as we've done with other things, in the spirit of exploration, and wanted to encourage students as creators and makers, which we always do. But it was an interesting space. They found they had, you know, good tools to work with, and easily approachable. We have looked into now very, very closely in moving to the, you know, to the actually on sort of Amazon cloud space for running, because of we can control a number of things between branding and some of the load and volume testing that we can do in it. So yes, just as I said, we started in, but now looking closely into that. In terms of the models of engagement, with meaning like the things that work in Mozilla Hubs, or you yeah, just to make sure yes. So I think that what we've in generally, engagement was really like what we were after. You know, there's different curriculum goals that sometimes pursue with different initiatives. In this particular one was engagement. We wanted to open up spaces for creativity. So for us, really encourage students as makers and creators and collaborators was a peak. We wanted to see how they would actually engage with different types of content there. So we've tested a number of different content, from more like media content that can go in and kind of like just as very similar to a museum or a gallery, or explore on their own, as well as smaller settings. We've played games, for example. We've had talks, short talks, very short talks. And tomorrow we have a student-run conference, and in Mozilla Hubs we have the anthropology design ADX Design X. What has been interesting is that students, because it's accessible, and one of the things, big consideration for us is with the international and very, very diverse population without headset. We were very clear, knew that, this gives access and accessibility to many more to participate. And so we have students from, sort of liberal arts and social research play at the same time with students from design and technology and more like Parsons. I think different things appeal to different students, but in general, those interactions, this is not a space where we'd encourage anybody to spend more than 20 minutes. We actually, try to make those quick interactions that they actually quite highly engaging, that there is movement of, as we think about, and I'm kind of the creative head in architecture design, sort of behind many of our spaces, as well as the feedback that goes into them. We try to have places to explore, things to do. Also, like, sort of different, because there's spatialized audio, you can actually move to different corners and engage in conversation and come back together. And so those are great. But we also have a Halloween party, and we have a, like a rooftop, roof deck overlooking New York City, things that they missed. Everybody that comes to the space, one of the first things they do is to actually walk to the corner of the space where you can see the new school and Fifth Avenue. And, one of the, just no matter how many times I walk in to introduce the space, one of the first things is like what we all want to, where we all want to be. But we also like went into like really discovering what a very very kind of fantastic world would do in opening creativity. So I think shorter, definitely this more opportunity for less than 20, like looking for why, looking to, answering the question why there. There are other things we do that can be sent via, via in text form, in images, in GIFs, and they all work. And so you really ask yourself that question, why?
Awesome, thank you. Next up, a question for Alyssa. Have you worked with showing dementia patients familiar locations in 360 video to help them feel connected to the world around you?
Hi, David. Thanks so much for your question. That's a really good question. We have not used that for dementia patients. This was specifically geared for student learning. However, I think that's a really, really great idea. And I do believe when we were coming up with ideas for developing this project, the chair of geriatrics at the medical school, who's also participated on our project, did mention, that there is like literature and that idea of using 360. So we're definitely eager to build and expand on our project. So maybe that's one way we can take it. Thank you.
So listen, Cindy, I just wanted to kind of piggyback on that, because the dementia was the project that we had worked on at the University of Buffalo, and it was based off of research out of the UK. So they had used it in the UK, and we followed their research and tried to model it to create the content.
Excellent, thanks. And we'll finish up this Q&A session with one general question, and keeping in mind we've only got a couple of minutes left here. The question is, I found it easy to build in Second Life, but not so much in newer VR spaces. Are there any thoughts or suggestions on how to facilitate creation in these new spaces? And I think that's platform independent. So if anybody has come up with or run into a platform where you think it's really easy for people to jump in and customize, this would be a good place to let us know.
I've been having students doing the, regular VR space. They're now working in hubs, and hubs really is clunky. It also is, open source, and I think it's going to be changing. It gives you that thing you can simply send out a link. So that's the real plus of it. It has features, but it's not easy to develop. You go crazy right now. You can't situate things. The objects float all over, but I think it's coming, and I hope it'll stay. So that's been my experience and my students' experience. They like both, but Hubs has potential, but it's still clunky.
So I think a space that is easy to get into is Frame VR, and the reason being, you don't have to build. It's kind of like you choose your options from a gallery to a theater to like an expo hall. Some of you may find, for me, it's a very, very limiting space. But you can do quite interesting things. You can be creative, and I think more and more options are becoming available and bringing content there. So all you need is your content, and they now have support things like 360 images, which is one area to kind of be a little bit more immersed in it, and starting to open it up in other spaces. But Frame VR is also very, very, very easy to enter, and I must say some of you, and myself included, find it limiting.
I'll echo on to that. I have a group of high school girls, and they're building they're using Frame VR to build a gallery to teach the world about the Sustainable Development Goals from a youth perspective. And so there are enabling constraints with it, but it is a platform that high school students can figure out and be challenged and get in and be really excited about. Another option for world building is you can create worlds in alt space using just the kits and the Oculus headset. You don't need to use Unity. And I had a course where teachers did world building, and without any Unity experience, without necessarily really wanting that learning curve, and they build amazing worlds just using the kits, using good pedagogy, and just the headset. So you can design right in it. And most of them said too, like that design process was very, just like a healing process. Like it was like painting, right? Because you're in the headset and putting up trees and using the items from the kits in like really creative ways to actually build what you want. And so not a high learning curve there, but a lot of creative output.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much to all of our speakers for this session. Applause all around. We're going to have a very brief break, and then at 2 o'clock, we'll pick up again with the next session. So hopefully you'll all be back for that, and we'll do this all over again. See you soon.
Hi, welcome back to Beyond Zoom 2. I'm Mark Williams. I'll be chairing this next session. Two quick points. If by chance I mispronounce your name, please correct me. I'd much rather know how to pronounce your name correctly. And those of you posting questions, please put them in the Q&A. And if possible, indicate who the question is for, because they accumulate over the presentations. So our first presenter is James Mahoney from Computer Science at Dartmouth, who's talking about Towards a Persistent Social Interaction Research Lab in VR. James. You are muted.
Okay. How about now?
It's good.
Can you see my screen?
Indeed.
Great. Hi, everybody. As Mark said, I'm James Mahoney. And before we begin, I'd just like to thank John Bell and everybody else for all the work they've done to pull this conference together. I teach digital arts in the computer science department at Dartmouth. And I'm currently teaching classes to help students learn to design and build virtual experiences. And I'd love to show you the work from some of those classes, but instead I'm going to show you something else today. Project Silver is a recent project funded with a gift from Facebook, and it's a social interaction laboratory in VR.
The entire project has been built by undergraduate students at Dartmouth, students that have taken the XR classes that I teach. And these are the core goals of the Project Silver. It should be educational, and not just for the few students that are building it, but also for the entire, the other XR students at Dartmouth that are trying to learn this. They can learn by example. And it should also provide a showcase for other VR work done at Dartmouth, such as, the really cool projects that are being done in the Dali Lab. There's a theater VR project with Professor Andunu, brain sciences, architecture, earth sciences, a lot of really cool things going on. And maybe we can promote access to some of that work and help shine a light on it. But ultimately, we recognize the fact that when a researcher, either a scientist or an artist wants to explore some, concepts or ideas in VR, especially social VR, the barrier to entry is very high. It's usually too much to develop the multi-user networking, avatar systems, even, basic interactions, to even get to the point where you can ask the questions that you want to ask. And so we hope Project Silver can help maybe provide a platform for some of these people to do their research. So I'm going to show you a quick video of where we're at today. So you start in a dark enclosed space, and it's set up, it tries to set up an eventual dramatic reveal of the main space. And besides entering your name, you need to learn 3 core skills. First you have to learn how to teleport, how to move around. And next, you learn that you can grab things and interact with them directly. And lastly, that you can grab things at a distance using a distance grab. And once you do that, it opens the door and starts the multi-user experience.
So this is the main space, the main promenade, a place to be seen and to see and be seen. And all of these around here are portals that would lead to student projects and other experiments that we're running.
So we have spatialized audio working.
Hey, you guys.
Hey.
Hey, how are you?
How's it going?
Good.
Good.
So, Hunter, what are you doing this summer?
This summer?
Yeah.
Trying to find a place to live in Hanover. Maybe gonna hang out around here for the summer and finding an internship
Here,
or
like in here?
part-time job.
Hang out in here?
In here? Yeah.
Maybe we could build a little.
If I
build
could buy an
treehouse over
apartment
there.
in here, I would. Yeah, right up there. That's where I want to live this summer.
Yeah.
Hey, Hunter.
I'm gonna live in Collis in my VR headset.
So we have lip sync working.
Hey, Hunter, can you show
We
me
have
the,
facial expressions.
Right now I'm smiling
And
angry.
we have a custom avatar system that's already in place.
Yeah.
I think that should be angry, happy-ish.
Yeah.
This is a sad face.
Yeah. Nice. That's great.
Yeah. But when we're in here, we're always happy. So.
It's the happy place. So this is where we can demonstrate all kinds of different interactive mechanisms in VR. Hey, James. Nice job on the networking.
Thank you.
Mechanisms in VR. You can grab this and control that boat. These things can be very difficult for students, but this is a good demonstration of how this stuff works. You can grab the things, move them around. That is so cool. You can, all kinds of buttons. There's multiple ways of doing it. Not always sure which was the right way. Do these experiments and we can show students how to do that.
It's the weight of a bowling ball, so it's not easy.
It's a little heavy.
Yeah. You gotta put your strength into it.
Oh!
More of a
That's
shot
not good.
put.
Oh, yeah, that's heavy.
45-degree angle
my
feels about
God.
ideal.
That'll give
Yeah,
me,
you're getting a real workout.
that'll really work out my biceps. All right, I'm going to head out, you guys. Thanks a lot.
Yeah,
Great
of
job.
course.
Right.
Good work.
Hey, Professor.
See you later.
Oops.
All right, thank you, James. Next up is Ana Reyes, who is affiliated faculty at Thomas Jefferson University and UPenn, discussing design of a tool ecosystem for a course on leading in the digital age. Anna.
Hello, I'm so glad I came to this. It's so exciting to join so many kindred spirits in this collective opportunity to look at remarkable XR work. I am mostly a practitioner, and so I'm going to talk about this tool ecosystem. It was assembled for a quickly created online grad course in strategic leadership. It was designed for full-time, non-technical working professionals mid-career, taking multiple courses last fall during a pandemic in a program that was largely very analog. Last time I taught a course online there a couple of years ago, people had to go to the university to have enough broadband and equipment to actually use the equipment. So a big change in this pandemic. In this educational context, it seemed particularly important to me to move beyond Zoom and to leverage tools that would accelerate digital leadership capabilities, such as learning agility, digital savvy, entrepreneurial foresight, inclusive design and community building, and virtual collaboration. So I'm going to show you the tool ecosystem, and let me put up the slides. That would have helped. I won't talk about this, but if anybody's interested, I've written up how we put the tools together, and you can have the slides afterwards. But the combination of tools was selected because together, these tools provided engaging digital versions of educational practices that were emphasized in the program, such as systems and design thinking and collaborative peer learning. They supported immersive activities and required, most importantly, no special hardware, no special software or broadband capacity beyond that of other program courses. They each offered effective built-in on-demand IT support. Each afforded high-quality immersive user experiences for entry-level participants. And this was a way to engage people who normally have many, many pulls for attention in an online course. So with that, let me talk about the only VR component of the course, which I've used virtual worlds, I don't know, starting in 2009 in Second Life, when Penn was in Second Life, and we've explored many, many for the enterprise. So I chose Virbela originally because I thought we could integrate gaming in it and actually put a management simulation in and show the dashboard in the room. It didn't work out that way. So the campus map for this virtual world is in the center. And what's remarkable about Virbela is not any of the features, but that it works. And it works for people that are non-technical, and that it's built for user experience. So the avatar starts in the top left in the walk-in closet, and you click, 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 create your avatar. And when you hit save, you're dumped into this landing zone on the top. And there are concierges, like hotel concierges, that come and greet you and show you around and show you how to walk and talk, which if you're a regular person that's never played an online game or never been in any kind of 3D environment, this is amazing. They have the information booth. It's always staffed with people to answer questions, and it has a ticket booth. You click and you get teleported to IT support for initial setup or any time on demand. I have linked the campus hub with all the learning videos and PDFs. I've linked a talk to the information booth, which is about the state of VR use in Virbela. Like many virtual worlds, they're starting to accommodate different modes of entry. And at the bottom, I've linked a music fest because this is the other remarkable feature of Verbella. It supports thousands of users and it works. So this is a music fest they did last year across stages across the campus. You can see that there's leisure activities. Virtual soccer is great, riding a powerboat around the campus. Okay, so these are the workspaces in Verbella. In the middle, you see an auditorium. On the right, an expo center. They both accommodate thousands of people. They're all out of the box. This is not a place for builders. This is a place that was made to replicate real physical organizations. And so what they have are the things people in organizations use. They have presentation screens. They have web browsers. They have share screen. You can write sticky notes. You can put things on the walls. But basically, it's made for people to do work like they would to replicate. What they don't have is they don't take advantage of what virtual reality has over the physical world. So for example, you have to walk around the furniture in the virtual room. You can't just walk through it, and you can't fly and things like that. Despite the cartoonish looks of the avatars and the simple physical worlds, you really do get presence, and you get serendipity, and you get emotional connections, and people like it. I actually met someone from Europe that I hadn't, in a business that I'd been connected to years before. Just happened to be walking around the world. It was very fun. There are also a couple of issues. It can't integrate websites with a sign-in, so we couldn't play a simulation, and we couldn't use IDEO, the crowdsourcing platform. So that was actually problematic, and we ended up back in Zoom. Despite the initial glitches and the idea that students had to learn a whole bunch of tools that together replicated their organizational work, they mastered them. They learned how to design events, how to onboard participants who were not accustomed to these worlds, and they did end up designing a final presentation and inviting a large group and designing a holiday social party for a large group. And so, you know, was it worth it introducing all these tools? What the students said, because I asked them in the end, that between the content that looked at the future of work and gave people who would otherwise not really have curiosity about these things, what it did was it introduced them to what's in the world that they don't know about, and they actually used the learnings from the course to introduce some of these tools into their workplaces, and it spawned a little research project on pandemic adaptation to fully remote work. That's what I have.
That's great. Thank you so much, Anna.
Mm-hmm.
Next up is Dr. Natalie Math, who is at Westfall College of Media Arts and Design at Drexel, discussing using VR creative tools to engage students in virtual world building to overcome social isolation. Natalie.
Hi, hello everyone. Let me share my screen. So I'm assistant professor at Drexel University and teaching immersive media in the digital media department. But my background, really, I'm coming from industry, and I'm an independent creator. I created over the past 6 years, in VR. So with the pandemic, there were so many issues with students that I figured after the spring, my next class in the fall should really address some of those issues and help students meet and socialize in better ways than what Zoom allows. So
the idea was to engage students into being creators of their own world, of their own virtual world. And you know, that's not something totally new, but the way to do it was really to teach them, first of all, creative design and creative thinking, and second of all, having really rapid prototyping tools and easy to use tools. So you don't have to learn Maya, you don't have to learn, you know, 3D modeling, you don't have to do all those things. And at the same time, being able to create like a very personal space. So, sorry, I should have gone into presentation mode. So also, because we are designing spaces, you know, we should really use a spatial medium, a spatial tool, you know, being in VR for designing for VR. That's, you know, really what I wanted to experiment, because it's really a different way of designing. Having the sense of space and the sense of directly interacting with the object. And like I mentioned, you know, rapid prototyping. So what set of tools did we use? We use Miro for online collaborative brainstorming. We use ZBrush for 3D painting and Poly for pulling up some models that had already been done by other people. Unity was used mostly as a way to import from ZBrush and then export into Altspace VR as a social platform. I prefer Altspace VR personally because I'm familiar with it and I've been using it since the beginning. And it does allow import of, you know, your personal world the same way that VR chat allows you to do that. So through the brainstorming, you know, we first explored how did they feel, you know, during the pandemic? What was the issues? How, you know, and how did they feel isolated and you know, lack of purpose, lack of motivation, all of that. And then exposing them to some designing from the future approach of like imagining what the future would be like. How, you know, how could they design a virtual world where they could overcome some of the issues that they were experiencing? If, you know, the pandemic was supposed to last, because in the fall we were not sure, and here we are, you know, 6 months later, and it's still there. So definitely, you know, trying to create a world where they could re-energize, where they could meet with their friends, and where they could have a good time. And that was kind of the purpose of building those worlds. So the results was like very different worlds, very different style. Each one of them had a very personal vision of what they wanted. We have like a kind of forest hangout in cafe hangout in the forest. We have a tree house, we have a campground, and we have a Zen garden on top of the city building, a rooftop Zen garden, for example. And what was really interesting is that as they were building those worlds, you know, we went through several revisions, but we did the reviews inside of VR. We visited those worlds together. We said, oh, you know, let's try that here, or let's move that, or the scale doesn't match. And this was like a very different process from like just reviewing, you know, from a 2D screen, having the physical presence and the interaction. And, you know, at the end, they each gave a guided tour of their world and why they created it. And they also kind of spontaneously started to play games and throw parties. So that was kind of like the final week, and that was fun.
Natalie, we're sort of at time. Can you summarize the?
Yes, so I really wanted to say that, you know, this is very different from the traditional 3D modeling workflow, much more intuitive. It gave the freedom to create very personal spaces. The sense of presence and spontaneity was there. Of course, there were some difficulties with the, you know, creative tools, not all of them at the same level. We tested different ones. But for future work, you know, what I want to mention is really considering teaching as a creative and exploratory process. There are going to be new jobs out there, like virtual world designer is definitely going to be one of them. redesigning the virtual classroom, because guess what? None of them designed a closed space. They all designed very natural open spaces. Why do we need four walls, etc., in the virtual world? And then all the issues of accessibility, ethics, and privacy, dealing with those headsets and some of those tools or those social spaces. How do you want the data from your students to be? Who owns it? All of those issues are very important, I think, for us to consider. And then, of course, the difficulties that Samantha mentioned this morning is that the pace and policies of academia doesn't match at all with the timeline of the tech industry and those tools. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Natalie.
Yeah.
Okay, next up, Becky Lane, who is at Ithaca College, and Brian Moynihan, who is in the Global Education Solutions Management at Lenovo, talking about implementing VR at Ithaca College's teacher education program.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Mark. And so my name is Brian Moynihan, and I'm happy to be presenting today to such an amazing group with the wonderful Becky Lane about a partnership between Ithaca College and Lenovo. And so we only have a few minutes. So first I'm going to describe the technology that we used, and then Becky is going to describe how we implemented the technology at Ithaca College. So I'll jump right in. So to begin with, my background is before I came to Lenovo, I was at UNC Chapel Hill, and I started groups there for faculty to think about XR and pedagogy, for students to be creating things for XR, and then also for everybody to have sort of a networking group where we also had a lecture series. And if you wanted to have more, you can check out this link that shows more about our higher ed solution. But to jump into it, Lenovo's solution for teaching with VR includes a combination of things. We really think about a complete solution that combines hardware with device and classroom management, with content, training, and services. So I'll go into a little bit more into those pieces, but for instance, the support, you could be one number to call if anything goes wrong. So the first is the headset that we have. So it's an all-in-one headset. It's lightweight. This is the one we used. It's got 4K screen. Think Reality is a way you can manage those headsets, where you can, with just a couple of clicks, add and remove content from them. Land School Air is a way for the instructor to just press a button and everybody's doing the same thing at the same time. And then, there's use cases for every discipline and every profession in higher ed that we're really excited about, and this all works online or in person. So now we'll go into the content that we use. One of them is Uptail, which is a great way for teaching with VR. So you take your own 360 videos, you add in all these interactions, you can do assessments based on that. So you have a web-based way of going online and doing that. It works on headsets best. That's the premium experience, but it works on other devices. And then you get the analysis. So I love it for all kinds of features. Definitely check out what you can do with it. Next, Creative. So because this was K-12 content, we had STEM content in physics, chemistry, biology, and math that are all set up for K-12 students. And from Mozilla Hubs and Spoke, which I think a lot of you know about, but web-based 3D avatar chat that works across all devices. And Spoke is a way of creating those. So with that, I'll jump over to Becky.
All right, thank you. So I'm Becky Lane, and I'm the Associate Director of Innovative Technologies here at Ithaca College. And about 3 years ago, we started this IC Immersive initiative designed to integrate XR into teaching and learning here. So I've been really trying to find those professors who are a little bit more adventurous, a little forward thinking, who want to use this technology in the classroom. And we really had a great partnership lately with the education department, because when COVID hit and the campus shut down, we had a big problem because there's all these students who needed to have bodies to teach to practice teaching, but our campus was closed. So what we did is we mailed headsets to each student, and then gave them opportunities to meet in social VR to practice teaching. And we also gave them education on best practices, how to use the headsets, how to create in these different programs that we were using. We started off using AltSpace VR, but we had some issues with that. But we are now, go ahead, next slide, please. What we found is that the students really liked it. And I know that's not a very scientific thing to say, but just the comments that we had when I was listening to the keynote, talking about holding space and being seen and the idea of co-presence, all of those were really reflected in the comments that we got from the students. So they loved it. And the picture that you see there with in AltSpace, we recreated our campus on AltSpace. And when we brought them in there for the first time, after being at home for 6 months, the joy was just really incredible to see them exploring their own campus because they missed it so much. And it was a very familiar thing for them to be in. So they really loved the hands-on immersive impact of teaching and learning in these virtual spaces. The downside, the headsets we were using at the time, they were really hard to manage. There was no central management system. I had to go, not only did I have to go around to every Walmart in the 60-mile area and buy them, I had to install all the software on them, each one with my own personal phone. If you've run a lab, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And the account management and battery life was just really poor. And the systems that we're using weren't cross-platform. So fast forward a few months, next slide, please. We're using the Lenovo system this year with a pilot project in it with the education department again. So again, each student is getting their own headset to use either in their dorm or at home, because we're in a hybrid situation right now at Ithaca College. And they got training on how to use Mozilla Hubs and Viative and Uptail. And they've been charged with taking these tools and figuring out how to use it in their own classroom curriculum development. So we've got some pretty interesting projects that they're doing. We've got people who are doing something on figurative language in hubs where you have to travel around and have all these different experiences. We've got somebody who is trying to recreate the courtroom in To Kill a Mockingbird. And so it's really interesting to see how these students are taking to this tech. And especially when the education department, I mean, just they're not the most tech savvy population that we have on campus, but they are really taking to this particular technology. And the real bonus is that they're going to be taking the kids into their student teaching experiences this summer. So they not only get to learn it, experience it, they get to practice with it in their own personal, professional training.
That's great. I think we're at time. Is this a...
That's about it. I mean, proper onboarding, people need to be in the space, don't rush things, and enterprise level management was a real lifesaver for us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing.
Fantastic. Great presentation. Thank you so much. Next up is a team from Dartmouth, Jonathan Chipman in the Spatial Analysis Lab, Edward Meyer in Department of Earth Sciences, and Jacob Chen, class of 22. Take it away.
Thanks very much, Mark. Are you able to see the screen and hear me?
Indeed.
Great, thank you. Yes, I'm going to be talking about some projects using 3D modeling and XR for student engagement and field research in the geosciences. And I love the question in the keynote about why do this? And so field work is really critical in geology and physical geography and all the geosciences. And students need to learn how to do it. It's an important part of learning this subject and being a professional. But there are lots of obstacles. I mean, obviously this past year, there were literally obstacles, like we could not go to Greenland to do our field work. But there are other obstacles: cost, the difficulty of bringing students to remote locations to do field work, the need to train students to work before they go out into the fields to save time, et cetera. So there are lots of kind of incentives driving the adoption of virtual methods to help train students in field methods in the geosciences. We've done this using flat screen 3D visualization, using Metashape and Sketchfab and other tools with no specialized equipment needed, and it's relatively easy to produce and use. We're also focusing on immersive 3D visualization for a closer match to the actual field experience. I want to say, you know, to me, I think that we use this in sort of class situations, like in labs in the introductory earth sciences class. My colleague Ed Meyer developed a whole suite of virtual field trips for the intro class. But what I'll be talking about today is using it for research. So actually getting students in the research process as part of their learning. And the case study I'll be talking about briefly here is virtual lichenometry, measuring lichens at Kangerlussuaq, Greenland. This is in Western Greenland, in the non-ice covered part of Greenland, although you can see the ice sheet here. These are our 5 study sites that we're working at. And this is what the landscape looks like. We're studying lichens that are located on rocks in these soil deflation patches or soil erosion patches, trying to measure the diameter of these lichens to tell how old they are using growth curves, and then tell how rapidly the scarps, the little cliffs at the edge of these patches, have been retreating. So the students are learning to do field research in Greenland virtually without going to Greenland. This was a nice case study because we have actual data, non-virtual work done by my colleague Ruth Heindel here from this paper a couple of years ago at many of these same sites. So doing actual lichenometry, measuring the lichens with these calipers. We then, for the virtual version of this, have built 3D models for 16 of these sites using Metashape, very high resolution photogrammetric tools. We also have tools for working with high resolution satellite imagery as well. And kind of working on a flat screen 3D environment over the last summer, Julia Siegel, research assistant, went in and measured the diameters of lichens, replicating Ruth's work essentially, but in a kind of a flat screen 3D environment. Jacob Chen has now been developing tools for kind of doing things in this more immersive environment. So these are calipers basically in a Unity project that involves our photogrammetric model. We've got other tools here. Julia's work using kind of the flat screen 3D VR approach here. You can see a comparison between her Metashape-based work and Ruth's work in situ measuring the lichens at some of these sites. And basically there's a very good fit overall. So we're getting very similar scarp recession rates, even though the sites that we measured and that Ruth measured are actually, there are different soil patches at the different sites. So you wouldn't expect them to be identical here. For the VR version of this, again, there's sort of several components to this. There's the visualization process. We need very high resolution textured models based on photographic imagery, movement process to move around, several ways of doing that. Jacob has been developing these measurement tools, a laser rangefinder, other kinds of tools, calipers, et cetera, and then exporting data. So you can make measurements, but you also need, students need to be able to export them, to record them, kind of like writing on a clipboard, for example. So just showing kind of how this works. We would use like these calipers on the right for measuring the diameter of the lichen. So I'm literally in the VR environment holding these calipers, and I'd position them next to a lichen and expand or contract them to fit. And then measure the distance from that lichen to the little eroding scarp there using the laser rangefinder. We've got other tools. Jacob's built a tape measure and other things we're planning on as well. Kind of wrap things up. So we did this kind of case study because we have actual non-virtual data that we could compare the results to. And so far the results are pretty comparable between the VR, the flat screen 3D, and Ruth's work in situ in Greenland. This does require having a 3D model of the site, and that can be built either at the meter scale using satellite imagery or the centimeter scale with UAV or drone imagery. And the benefit of this is it allows students to do remote work on actual research projects. We've got lots of other projects in earth sciences and at Dartmouth where students need to be going out into the field in person and also virtually. And so we're working on kind of expanding these to cover other areas as well. I'd like to acknowledge, again, first Ruth Heindel, who collected all the real world data in Greenland, Julia Siegel, who has not, as far as I know, set foot in Greenland, but collected a lot of data virtually there this summer when Greenland was closed to Americans, Doug Hill, John Bell, and especially the Newcomb Institute Convex Grants Program. Thanks very much. I'll be happy to talk about this later if people have questions.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Very impressive and a lot of skill involved and a great spirit of adaptation as well. Next up is Emily Sherwood, who's the Director of Digital Scholarship and Studio X and Mohammed El Sayed, who is the CARP Library Fellow for Immersive Tech Development, presenting on Dream University Challenge, Fostering Community Through Virtual Spaces.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. We're very excited to be here today to talk to you about a project that we've been running out of University of Rochester. Emily Sherwood, Director of Digital Scholarship and Studio X. Mohammed.
And yeah, I'm Mohammed El Sayed. I'm a junior undergraduate studying computer engineering, and I am a CARP fellow as well.
So the CARP Fellow is undergraduate research students who work with our new XR space and program at University of Rochester. So Studio X is intended to be the hub for extended reality at University of Rochester, and it fosters a community of cross-disciplinary collaboration, exploration, and peer-to-peer learning that lowers barriers to entry, inspires experimentation, and drives innovative research and teaching in immersive technologies. COVID unfortunately halted the completion of our physical space last summer, but it will be built this summer. But we continued to build community this year through workshops and various types of programming. This past summer, due to COVID distancing restrictions, a University of Rochester student reached out to us to inquire about virtual meeting spaces to foster community in lieu of the physical library spaces. Basically, what they had noted was we all miss those kind of happenstance, casual interactions, like whether that's talking to friends between classes or meetings. And those interactions, especially on a college campus, really help build community for students. And they were wondering if it was possible to have virtual spaces to do this. So this student's inquiry helped us inspire the Studio X staff and students and the iZone, which is an innovation zone on campus, to think about the Dream University Challenge. And the point was we really wanted to center the students in the design process, to think about what types of spaces would encourage them to collaborate and connect. And so the goals of the larger challenge were to gain skills in design thinking and building 3D spaces, and also to work as a team to imagine and build ways to connect virtually. So we really wanted them to be part of that process, to tell us what they would need in spaces in order to connect. Like many other people have spoken about today, we opted to use Mozilla Hubs, and there was a number of reasons, many of which have also, of course, been mentioned. It's platform agnostic. We liked that it was web-based and didn't require a headset. We had students all over the world, and we weren't going to be able to get everyone a headset. It's free, except for, of course, you can pay for the expensive Amazon Web Service version, and we opted not to do that. It's entry level. A lot of students were really intimidated because they didn't know coding and they wanted to be involved. And so instead of working in like Unity, for example, we opted to use Hubs because Hubs and Spoke are very easy. You can build a world without coding. You can also use ready-made content, and you can import your own content as well. Mohammed.
Yeah, so the challenge lasted about a week and a half. We began with a design thinking workshop where we took the students and we began brainstorming what kind of gathering spaces, virtual gathering spaces they'd like to see. And then we took them and taught them the little intricacies of using Hubs and Spoke to build these workshops. And then they had time to build. Then we had a voting phase, and then a celebration phase at the end for the winners. And throughout this entire process, the communication was mainly done via Discord. And it was very, very interesting to see it go from what was essentially a barrage of questions to what we wanted, a little community forming up where the participants were answering other participants' answers by the end of the challenge. Next slide. And so here is one of the winners. They created a space they call Dream Rusheries. And what I find very, very impressive about this particular space is that you can see on the left their original base outline, and right next to it is the final product. And in about a week and a half, they learned from scratch how to do this. They were offered online resources such as the models and all that, but along with Discord, they were able to get this done. Next slide. And this is another notable winner. And as you can see here, it's not a single space. And what I liked particularly about this group is they identified that not everybody, would prefer a specific space. So they connected the worlds via portals, and that allowed them to build up these spaces with more detail. Instead of doing one space with a lot of detail, you had multiple spaces with a lot of detail for whether you wanted to sit down and watch TV or hang out in the snow, even though we're already in Rochester. I don't know why anybody would do that. But yeah, next slide.
Great. So things that we learned, of course, when using hubs, it's best to use Mozilla Firefox. We had some people trying to use Chrome, and of course that just was not working as well. We did have, even our judges were sort of, though I sent them instructions on how to navigate in hubs, they had challenges with that. So we just need to make sure that you're being really clear with people on how to navigate. Once they figured it out, it was pretty easy. Be careful of model and texture sizes in Spoke. The web-based XR, of course, has limitations in terms of performance. So we ran up some against that. Checking your room settings before making things public. Otherwise, people can alter your room. If that's a problem, sometimes you actually want them to do that. One of the things that the second group that Mohammed talked about, UR Haven, did was they linked their rooms together, and that allowed for some, that cut down on some of the performance issues if we had separate rooms that people were just linking together. It also allows for larger events to be able to have, up to so many people in different spaces at the same time. Of course, many people have talked about the plus side of spatial sound, which is also true, of course, for hubs. And one of the things that we found in planning this, we had office hours for some of the design team coming from the iZone, and then of course all of us working in Studio X. And we actually found Discord was better, like students being able to throw out the question and get it answered at point of need, or again, being to throw out the question and getting the teams to help each other was really great. And I think the big discovery for us in this process was that doing collaborative projects like this in a short amount of time and like having teams join, one of the teams, they didn't even know each other. They just kind of all came to the event and then joined up and became a team. That actually created the community, the virtual community that the students were thinking about and hoping for in the spaces they designed. So it became less of a competition and more just them encouraging each other. And both of the groups were really excited about what each other had developed and had lots of good questions. So really that community aspect in doing the event got to the end result that we wanted to begin with when thinking about creating virtual spaces. Finally, we would like to thank everybody who was involved. That first group were the people who ran the challenge. The second group helped us think through the challenge in the fall and started working on designing and doing advertising. And then on the right, people from the library who helped us promote the events, and our judges who voted on the final submissions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily and Mohammed. Great presentation. So we have some time for Q&A. I wanted to give Natalie a chance to, she was kind enough to post several links, and maybe you could just quickly give us an overview of those links, and can everyone see them in the chat? Natalie, are you here?
Yeah, sorry. Yes, I did post them in the chat. One of them is just a link to YouTube video, which is kind of the guided tours that the student recorded, taking you through the worlds that they created and how they thought about it. And the second one is an event in Altspace VR tomorrow, where you can, if you create an account with Altspace, you can just enter the main hub where we have 4 different portals, and you can just go through those portals to visit those student worlds and experience them directly in virtual space.
Excellent. So thank you so much for this panel. There was such a marvelous emphasis on community and collaboration and attaching what I think all of us as teachers enjoy to inspire most in our students in various ways. And I'm wondering, in the spirit of collaboration and community, if there are questions that the panelists have for one another about their presentations, perhaps about some of the specific technologies or learning protocols or processes involved. I know that puts you a little on the spot, but
One of the questions I have, if I could, I've always thought about thinking in multiple dimensions as being really interesting. That you start with something and it's not just like thinking spatially, but like you start thinking about politics or gender or a million other things in multiple dimensions, and how you can, visualize this and make people think and understand things they otherwise wouldn't think and understand. I was wondering if that's sort of filtered into anyone else's work.
Don't be shy. Go ahead. And James, I saw you shaking your head. Go ahead.
Yeah, so in our class, we talk about that quite a bit. We talk about, you're building these three-dimensional environments, you've got, stereoscopic vision, and it's like the experience, it has to be meaningful. Like, use the space for having meaning. Like, what can you do to express in that medium that would be difficult in other medium? And we talk about that quite a bit. And it works both for science, Jonathan Chipman's work. I mean, seeing it in 3 dimensions makes a big difference. But also, I think artistically, it opens up, what can you do artistically when all of a sudden you can be in another place and it's 3-dimensional, and, where things are has meaning. If it's over there, if it's near to me or far away and all that. So we talk quite a bit about that. And I think it's really an important point of the whole thing, right?
Other thoughts? There's a comment in the chat suggesting that hyperbolic geometry has promise for higher dimensional rendering. Any response to that?
It's more about the spatial design, and the kind of serendipity that it allows. So, for example, one of our students designed a Zen garden on top of a roof building. So you have the entire cityscape, and then you are sitting. And first, he didn't design any, any barrier around, so you could just fall off, and and so finally, he came up and he did put a fence around, but you could still cross the fence actually. But what he did was, when he's smart, he extended the ground. So you are just hovering over. If you cross the fence, you don't fall anymore. You are just hovering over and floating, on top of the city. So it's like this kind of stuff. I don't think it could ever have been designed in a 2D screen. Without experiencing it physically, it would not have been designed this way. So it really creates like new possibilities, new ideas for spatial spaces. Yeah.
So in the tools,
please, Anna, please, yeah.
Yes, in the tools that I selected for my class, I was thinking of multiple dimensions with the tools. So it's a program that teaches a lot of design thinking for org design, but I wanted them to also think about the challenges that the world was in. So I picked the IDEO nonprofit platform because it embeds IDEO's design thinking for crowdsourcing solutions to big global challenges. And so they could pick whatever challenge they wanted to participate in, and they had to come back with presentations on what they learned, both about design and about the world problem and how that kind of mapped into their own world. So I thought about multiple things in many of the tools. I mean, the other thing that happens in these 3D spaces, for example, you don't even have to design it, as Natalie was talking about. It's in the spaces. So we took a bunch of people as an icebreaker exercise to ride these power boats around this virtual campus. And so here we are driving power boats, and people feel like they're together, and they're so excited after 6 months of being locked up at home that they're on the ocean and seeing all these buildings. And then somebody jumps out of the power boat and they're drowning in the middle of the ocean. And it takes a while for someone to say, oh my gosh, I can teleport out of here. I don't have to drown in this ocean. So there's a lot of humanity in these 3D spaces that people can enjoy together. And it does create bonding and community, I think.
That's great. Thank you so much. There was a question for James. Oh, no, it went away. I guess you answered it.
I answered it. I typed it in, but I can answer it. The question was, I showed that there's portals and what kind of things might be in those portals. So what I demonstrated in that video, it's really short, and you can see that was through one of the portals, was that room where it had all the interaction. And the idea was that I take students that are learning how to do this, how to build this stuff in
Unity. And they will all come in as a class. We come in and we go into that room and we start talking about knobs and switches and how to do all those things. And some of the coding and some of the setting up for those things is really difficult. And we have a developer mode. You press a button and the invisible boxes become these translucent purple. And you can even make, we're working on now is that you'll see little bits of code perhaps, so they can help people learn how to do it. But ultimately, the students, what they'll do is we'll teach them how to do these things. And then they make these crazy, really cool stuff. They'll make games, escape rooms or data visualizations, wind flow visualizations. They do all these great things, but then they die, right? Then they're kind of gone. And so it'd be nice to be able to have, hook them up to these portals. And then you come in and you can go through these portals and you can see all this work. And, we're still in the early stages. You can tell from I think the video, it's still pretty crude. We've solved a lot of the infrastructure problems. This term, I think, is going to be a really big term. We have a lot of infrastructure in place. And I think what we're going to have to solve right now is the idea of streaming content. We can't build one world that already has all these things baked into it. It has to be able to pull it off some server somewhere. And so we're working on that right now. We think we have a solution to it, and that'll open it up. And then we also want to make it a persistent world. So I can send you just that the entry area, and then you don't have to, once you have that, you can just go and check things out, and it's a persistent world. And so that's what we're working on right now. Did I answer that question?
Yeah, that's great. I have a couple of, oh, please, Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah, Mark, I just want to follow up for just a moment on James's comment there. And it is true. So one of my co-presenters here, Jacob Chen, or not presenter, but co-participants, I guess, Jacob Chen, was a student in James's class last fall. And James trains these students. They get these wonderful skills and they're very enthusiastic and they build their enthusiasm for VR development. But then there needs to be this VR infrastructure at the university to kind of get students into these classes and then bring them out of these classes, working with faculty, working on research projects, doing things that are of interest to them. Here we've also, another critical component of that infrastructure here is this community of supportive visionary institutions like the Newcomb Institute, which has been very supportive of VR projects, the Dev Studio, research computing, et cetera. So you need faculty like James who can be training students and teaching them how to work in VR. You need projects for them to work on, externally funded projects, and a kind of a locally supportive set of institutions as well.
Makes a lot of sense. There are a couple of questions here that I'm going to present as a toss-up to whoever cares to. From an instructional design perspective, how would you decide which course or program can utilize a VR project? And secondly, is anyone building virtual spaces that could be considered a course, which would have aspects inside of it that could be considered the lectures within the course? I think we're getting into some of this collaborative synergy that we're discussing. And then within each of those lectures, there's an interactive set of information.
I would like to give a quick answer.
Please. Yeah.
For me, it's I don't think about it this way. I really think about it as a process. So I don't think as the virtual world containing the lesson. It's like experiencing the virtual world, building it, designing it, is the learning process. So it's an experiential learning process. It's not a consumer learning process where you enter a world and you read the lecture on the wall or something like that. It really has to be thought of as an experience. Yeah.
Okay. Other thoughts, other inputs?
I think from the instructional design perspective, I was thinking about how VR would work in different courses. We have approximately 60 faculty across disciplines working in various aspects of XR. So a lot of optics faculty and STEM faculty, but also humanities and classics. And so some of it is, my background is in digital scholarship and we're sort of moving into XR. And so I work with faculty a lot and thinking about what they're trying to do in their courses and what their learning objectives are. And I don't think it's about saying,
these classes will be right for XR. It's about understanding the faculty and how they teach and what types of engagements they want their students to have. And sometimes just those who might be willing. Like there might be some who are like, sure, I'm excited and I trust you and I'm willing to try that out. And I think that those are the places where you can have meaningful pedagogical collaborations where they take the time to like learn with you and to try to develop something that can be meaningfully implemented in a class.
That makes a great deal of sense.
Yeah, I really agree with you, Emily. I just in the professors I've worked with from like someone who's in the physical therapy department, it's going to have a lot different outcomes and intentions than somebody who's in art. So we had an example where an art teacher wanted people to have an embodied experience looking at street art, street murals. So we used Google Earth. And then they talked about how it was different being in that space to see the art instead of just seeing it as a picture. Whereas somebody in PT wants to be able to measure, and is this helping? Are people learning better? So I think it really depends on who you're working with. But I like to look at VR as just like you can use it in any class. It's just a matter of working with somebody to figure out how to maximize and really leverage that technology and leverage what makes it different.
Yeah, I think that sometimes you hear rare, impossible, difficult, or expensive. Anything that's rare, impossible, difficult, or expensive in the real world, you could do very well in VR. But I think I echo everybody else. It's mostly finding somebody who's passionate. It doesn't matter what the field is, that somebody who's like, I want to see this in my class. That's what you really need.
Does the formation of the communities in your classes affect the kinds of designs or projects that the students want to create? I mean, is there a sense that this particular community lended itself toward this kind of project or that kind of project? Or is it just too, does the instruction have to be more top down than that? I'm thinking about intersectionality, or what's the mix of genders in the classroom, or international students. Does that play a role in the kinds of projects that the students are interested in creating?
At least for our challenge, and this wasn't a class, so I should say, like these were self-selecting students who during break decided they wanted to spend a week and a half building a virtual space. That's that's self-selecting. But we did have international students. So there was one group who was trying to figure out how to sync up with one of their team members who was 12 hours, in a 12-hour different time zone. And so, in terms of like their commitment, there was a commitment there, but they also were really thoughtful about looking for ways to stay connected to the university. And they felt that these types of projects where they were getting to meet students from different disciplines and getting to work with people with different expertise. Like we had one student who was like, I'm good at project managing, not good at the technology, but she like ran that project and did it really well and was very excited. And so I think sometimes it's self-selecting if you're not talking about a course, but given the opportunity to really highlight the different skills that students can have and bring to this type of work. Like they don't all have to be computer programmers. In fact, it's better if they aren't. So that one of the things we really try to highlight is that intersectionality, at least the interdisciplinarity, can create much, much stronger projects.
Awesome. So thank you again so very much. I think we're at time. And speaking of community, I believe we're going to transition into some kind of virtual happy hour. I'm very curious to see what that will consist of. But thank you so much, panel. Fantastic work, and hope to be happy with you soon.